ready? All right. All right. It being 6:30, I will call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, August 9th. We are here in the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. First order of business is call to order. So Katie, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Ms. Garrison? Here. Mr. Maring?
Here.
Ms. Lakuta? Here. Mr. LeBrun? Here. Mr. Pankratz? Here. Ms. Flanagan?
Here. The board does have a quorum, and here I have proof of notice that this meeting has been publicly noticed. Before I ask for an approval of the agenda, I just want to mention we do have a full agenda tonight. On this agenda is a consent calendar that includes an early admissions request. We have time for public comment, and before we get to public comment, I will talk about the process for public comment tonight, because I know we have a lot of people that are here to speak, which is great. Then we'll have an OEA report. We will not have a student report because school has not started yet. And then we have a lot of action items. Policy 565 and 566, which the board did vote on a year ago. Policy 180 and 181, as well as other action items. And then we will go through our committee reports and also have a report on the school perception study. So we do have a full agenda this evening. So I will ask for a motion to approve that agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion does carry by 6-0 vote. Next action item on the agenda is approval of board members' remote participation pursuant to policy 180.02.5, which states that no board member shall participate remotely more than 2 times during a calendar year. However, the board, by majority vote, may allow a board member to participate remotely more than 2 times when circumstances justify such added remote participation. So that would require a motion, a second, and a majority vote of the board. So I will entertain a motion.
I'll move.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Katie, can you call the roll?
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Welcome to the meeting, Kevin. Can you hear us? Kevin, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay, we're good to go. All right, next on the agenda is the consent calendar. We do have some donations, so I will read those to thank those people appropriately. We have $15,000 for the new batting cage project from Youth Baseball, $15,000 of the new batting cage project from Oregon Booster Club, $5,000 for the new batting cage project from the Oregon Girls Fast Pitch Softball Association, $1,000 to Girls Cross Country from Lois and David Hageman in memory of Ken Hageman. We have a $729 donation to the splash pad. That's an anonymous donation. And then $5,000 for the scoreboard sponsorship from Dirty Ducks Cleaning and Environmental, and a $10,000 scoreboard sponsorship from M3. So we do really appreciate those donations to the Oregon School District, and we thank you for your support. If there's no item that board members wish to have removed from the consent calendar, I will honor a motion to approve that.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar as presented in the board packet.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes. We do have a consent calendar. The motion carries 7-0. Next up on the agenda is B, information items. First is public comment. Per board policy 180.05, any district resident shall have the right to address the board. Oh, okay. The board shall schedule 15 minutes at the beginning of each regular board meeting for members of the public to speak. This time period may be extended for up to 1 hour at the discretion of the president. The president may limit the amount of time that each person may speak, and each person, when called upon, will give their name and address in the district, and if applicable, the name of the group that they represent. So what we'll do is speakers will have 3 minutes in which to make their comments. I will read the list. People, in order that they signed up, they can come up to the podium here, and you will be given the microphone to speak. The board will not comment after each speaker and will reserve discussion to any items on the agenda. Since we do have a lot of agenda items tonight, I do believe we'll be addressing agenda items that people will speak upon. And then following public comment, any items may be referred to the appropriate administrator for follow-up with the speaker or placement of the matter on a future board agenda. And that was to comply with open meetings law. So what we will do is once we ask people to come up, again, you will say your name, where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 3 minutes. Katie, to my right, will have a card that lets you know if you have 30 seconds left, which is a yellow card, and the red card indicates your 3 minutes are up, so then we will stop you at that point in time so we can get everybody who wants to speak, and that's our intent tonight. So we will start off. First on the list is Andrew Drake.
Hi, everyone. All right, so I just want to tell a little story, my story, on how me and my family kind of came to be here in Oregon. So I'm actually a product of the Oregon School District. I graduated in 2001. After high school, I went to the military, completed my service in the military, honorably discharged, went to college, got my MBA. After that, I moved back to Dane County, where I met my wife, and we lived in Sun Prairie. Once we started having kids, we decided that Sun Prairie was not the right school for us. And we went and did some significant research, talked to a lot of people about where the best school district was. Obviously, my experience played into that role. Another thing that played into it was the values of each school district. So I went ahead and printed off the values from this school district that I believe that most of you were a part of putting together. And I wanted to just highlight a few things, and this is going to be in regards to the mask policy that's coming up for the school. So one of the things that says is the whole child emphasis, where each child is healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. A part of that, meet academic, behavioral, social, emotional needs of all learners. And I want to emphasize the all learners part. I have 3 kids that are going to be going through the Oregon School District, 3rd grade, 4K, and a younger one. When we talk about academic, behavioral, social needs of all students, I've watched my daughter decline in all 3 of those areas over the last year, and certainly part of that was because of the home school, not being able to be in person. But another big part of that is because of the mask mandate. This last spring, my 2nd grader at the time would come home and almost in tears because it was hard for her to sit in school and learn and talk and have normal 2nd grade relationships with her peers. The other thing I wanted to note, just one other note on here, it talks about caring professional educators and prioritizing the development of meaningful relationships with learners. I think we can all agree. I mean, Susanna Haig's sitting over here, and we just had a conversation about how she remembers my brother, who's 8 years younger than me, and so it's very important that you have that bond. I still have my favorite teachers. Tom Shrine was my favorite teacher who lives in McFarland. I still talk to him to this day. It's very important to have that relationship between the learner and the educator, and we're not getting that. I want to tell you another quick story. My 4K this spring, I went to pick her up from school, and we were walking outside, and she's kind of quirky, and she said, "Miss Teacher, I don't even know what you look like. Can I see your face?" And the teacher said, "Sure, let's socially distance." And she pulled down her mask, and my daughter's jaw dropped, and she was like, "Oh, I had no idea." And then she was kind of perplexed, and we got in the car, and and she goes, "I didn't know that she looked like someone we know," and she was just stunned. And I'm like, how do we foster that student educator relationship? Thank you. Just the last thing, I just ask for options. We want our kids to have an option to be able to have mask-free school.
Next up is Lee Burmeister. Lee Burmeister can come to the microphone, please. Your name, your resident address, and then you can address the board for 3 minutes. Lee, can you please speak closely into the microphone to make sure Kevin can hear you? Thank you.
Can you turn the microphone up? Because it doesn't seem like it's on. You have to talk really, really close.
My name is Lee Burmeister, 5421 Honeysuckle Lane. I've lived in Oregon for 16 years. My husband, Kevin Burmeister, is also out of the Oregon School District, graduated 39 years. We chose this school district due to such a spectacular upbringing he had. I have a third grader, Brooks, a second grader, Cash, and a 4Ker, Presley. I'm here for the mask policy. We are very disappointed in the lack of support and respect from the top. When we come to you guys, we feel we need, it's a need, we need you guys to support us, all of us. I don't feel like that's happening. My husband and I are demanding options. Our children will not be wearing a mask 7 hours a day, period. Leslie, you committed to my mom, Kevin and I, on July 23rd in your office to do some research on the harmful effects these masks have on these kids. Bacteria, pneumonia, them breathing in carbon dioxide. I know you can't answer it, but I hope you've done that because that's what I need out of this meeting. I need the research done on the masks and what it's going to do to these children. Basically how I feel, if you're following the CDC, I think you're probably a follower. I think let's stand up and be leaders. Not just for one side, not just for one part of the community, not just for one, side of the kids that want to wear masks. Let's stand up and be leaders for all of us as a whole. With options and choices. This community deserves this. Personally, our kids have awful allergies and asthma. Putting a mask on these kids seems so abusive, and just considering they're not at risk. We know the numbers. They have a better chance of getting hit by a car walking to school, God forbid, of getting COVID. Our family chose to be mask-free all summer. Pools, parties, restaurants, baseball, dance, swim lessons. Options and choices are the key words in this discussion. Our oldest son's birthday is September 1st, which we all know that's the first day of school. He is asking, how is this day gonna go for me? And I can't lie to him. We're gonna have a blast, but it's not probably gonna be a fun day for you. I'm gonna stand up for my family. When making your final decision on masks, please take into account there are lots of opinions, lots of facts. Our kids need to feel confident and comfortable going into Prairie View, our kids need to feel confident and comfortable going into Prairie View, just like I want the kids that wear masks walk in as well. I want them to feel confident and comfortable, and I don't think that's gonna happen. I think we're dividing this community. Thank you.
Next up is Kevin Burmeister. Okay.
Oh, cool. Do you want to see your name?
My name is Cashton Burmeister, and I want to tell you guys why I don't like masks. First, I get bloody noses from wearing all sorts of masks, and second, I can't breathe when I wear my mask, and uncomfortable when I wear my mask, and can't concentrate when I'm wearing all sorts of masks, and masks make me nervous, and mask makes me sneeze. Mask makes me cough. I breathe in my germs. Masks are gross. You can't.
Good job.
You can't hold in a fart, but you can hold in COVID-19. I don't think so.
Next up is Jeannie Dewalt.
That's Kevin Burmeister, actually.
Oh.
All right, sorry. Hello, my name is Kevin Burmeister.
Oh, okay. So you're, okay.
You skipped me a second ago for
Okay.
my son to go. Yep. Hello, my name is Kevin Burmeister. I live at 5421 Honeysuckle Lane. And this wasn't the way I started this, but as we can all see right now, how quick this divided this to that. It's sick. That's sick. I'm here today on behalf of all of the children returning to school, all the children this fall, who need choices and options. I have 3 children that will be part of the Oregon School District for many years to come, and I believe masking up kids that do not have a choice is wrong. Just because, say, Leslie doesn't want to have her child wear a mask to school doesn't mean that my child needs to wear a mask to school. It just doesn't make sense. I don't know. This is the time for children to have a choice. Let them tell you how they feel. I was able to be part of the boys' baseball team this summer, and it was great to see all of their smiling faces. It took time for some of the kids to be comfortable not wearing a mask, and at the beginning of the season, some of the kids did not wear a mask, and some did. That was their choice. By the end of the season, there were no kids wearing masks at all. Smiling, hugging, cheering, high-fiving. Great time. Great for the kids. And no one was ever bullying any of the kids either. The kids that decided to wear a mask, nobody said, you can't do that. You can't wear a mask. You can't do that. It was great. I really appreciated the time that I was able to spend with my kids. My wife and I were able to meet with Leslie Bergstrom a few weeks back, and we asked, what are some of the options that you have come up with for the families that choose not to wear a mask? She did not have an answer, so I'll ask you again, what options have you come up with for our kids? It cannot be all one way. We all need choices and options. I had my 8-year-old son write down a few things today about how he feels about masks. Cash did the same. Brooks did this while I was at work. Number 1 on his list, he says, it's hard. Here. This is his list. I copied it so I can read it, but this is his copy. It's hard to wear masks because of my allergies. It's not healthy to breathe my carbon dioxide. I respect my parents' wishes about not wearing masks. Small kids like my little sister, they won't wear a mask properly anyways. And I believe people should have a choice. That was the last statement that he had on his. Now, I put my notes together today when I got home from work. I didn't plan this out or anything else. I was sitting in the truck as I pulled in. Without talking to any of my kids, I find it really strange that when I walk in the door and my child's last note that he has on there was that I believe people should have choices.
Your time is up, Mr. Burmeister. Thank you.
Thanks for that choice.
Jeannie Dewalt.
Hello, I am Jeannie Dewalt, and I live at 2675 North Park Lane in Fitchburg. And I'm happy to be able to be here and be able to voice, ask you some questions and tell you or present some things that I found too. I did give all of you a handout, 3 handouts on the harms and ineffectiveness of masking. I do, yep, and you have them. There's some extras on the table over there if anybody wants them. But I do respect people who do want to wear masks, and that's why I'm here, is to ask for choice. And I think I'm here to the same reason that all of us are here, is that we love our kids, and we want the best for them. So my first question is, do you have, to any of you, do you have peer-reviewed studies and information on why masks are safe and effective? Does anybody?
We can't respond to public comments, so you can ask the question,
okay.
and we can address
Okay,
it
I'll
later
just
in
do
an
that.
action item. So you can just ask your questions, we'll make note.
The second one is, do you have studies and information on why masks are not safe, proven to be ineffective, and present risks? And so, you be present and work for all of us. Oh, I was just going to say, that's kind of what I'm expecting, is because you are here representing all of us and work for all of us, that you will have information on both sides. And either way, that's why I'm asking for choice, so that you can make your own decision. I was going to read just a couple of paragraphs from one of the handouts that I have here from Dr. McCrary, or McCary, I think it is. The CDC's mask decrees are perversely permissive as well as needlessly strict. Cloth masks aren't nearly as effective as N95 respirators, but the CDC directives ignore the distinction. Many of the face cloth coverings that people wear are not very effective in reducing any of the virus movement in or out. Epidemiologist Michael Osterholm, who served on the Biden transition team's COVID task force, told CNN. Next paragraph. We have been encouraging Americans to wear masks since the beginning of the pandemic, but special attention should be paid to the many children who struggle with masks. Public health officials claim to base their decisions and guidance on science, but there's no science behind mask mandates for children. A new research study by one of us, Dr. McCary, and his Johns Hopkins colleagues found that of the $42 billion the National Institutes of Health spent on research last year, less than 2% went to COVID clinical research, and not a single grant was dedicated to studying masks in children. There, of course,
30 seconds.
Oh, okay, thank you.
If you didn't see, she held up the card.
So, and there are many more facts, which I'm sure somebody else will get to, but if you actually refer to the peer-reviewed studies, there's a lot of factual information about why they're so unhealthy. I just know that, Leslie, you said too, you have the opportunity, right, the legal authority, all of you.
Your time is up. Thank
to
you.
give choice, and I'm hoping that you will give choice. And my last comment is just my opinion that I feel
Your time is up.
child abuse to mask up children.
Thank you. Cara Dill. Is Cara Dill here? Oh,
So it's
there's.
not possible to turn the microphone up?
I'll be super loud. You can hear me.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
There we go. Okay. Ready? Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Cara Dill. I live at 617 Bergamont Boulevard here in Oregon. I have 2 kiddos in the district, one entering 4K, and the other redhead right over there, and he's going to be entering 2nd grade. I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate the opportunity to address this school board as well as the many concerned parents that we have in the room tonight. It is hard to believe, but March of 2020 was 17 months ago. 17 months ago, masks made sense. Home detention even made sense. Protecting our most vulnerable made sense. As the days turned into months to year and a half, we have had the benefit of time and data. 17 months ago, we didn't know better, but we know better now. Now we have vaccines. We have proven treatments. The science is clear that these children are not affected by the virus like adults are. At this point, every adult has had the opportunity to get a vaccine. If you haven't, then you're telling everybody else that you are not concerned with getting COVID. The original argument for masking was to protect others until we could get a vaccine. 2 weeks to slow the spread, remember? 500 plus days later, that argument no longer exists. The new messaging is inconsistent at best. They are not even able to stay consistent across the various government guidance anymore. Pushing for large-scale masking now for the vaccinated actually disincentivizes getting the vaccine. At a time when misinformation is so prevalent, our schools should not be playing games with health and health information. We all understand it is not easy to have a productive conversation these days, and I am not interested in demonizing one side over another. We are completely split right now. That is absolutely ridiculous. I simply want to know the trade-offs, the unintended consequences, the downstream ramifications, and now, 17 months later, after reviewing the data and seeing how children in various districts around our state and our county went to school in person, virtually, masked, unmasked, and even played sports. Open schools didn't have more child COVID cases and certainly not more hospitalizations or deaths. but there has been a spike in depression, teenage suicide, kids falling behind and reading scores dwindling. Seeing how young children, my little kiddos, pull, adjust, tear, sneeze, wipe, and throw their masks in their bags just to put them right back on their faces.
Time is
Masking children now is anti-science burden on the very generation we have a duty to protect. I'm sure somebody will give me a couple of extra seconds on that
Well,
side.
we want to make sure that everybody
These
gets a
kids
chance
and
to
these
speak.
teachers have earned options. They have done the work to earn the options. We are grateful for our teachers. Mandates are divisive. They are authoritarian, and they do nothing but make those who reject the mandates question them. In the very spirit
Kira, we wanna
of
make
the
sure everybody gets a
excuse me,
chance
I'm
to
sure
speak.
somebody will yield for me.
Well, we've got a lot of people here, so
'Kay.
wrap it up in 30 seconds, please.
I absolutely will. I appreciate that extra 30 seconds. In the very spirit of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are trying to instill and support and uphold here in Oregon. We must be the leaders. We must join other communities like Wanakee in being the example that supports options and gives parents and teachers options. I join the many parents in this room tonight that are asking our leaders here, Troy, Mary, we just elected you. We elected you guys in this room to support science and support the social and emotional needs of our kiddos. And we
Kira,
call
your
for a
time
mask
is up.
optional return to school.
Thank you. Kim Anderson. Kim Anderson is next.
Hi, Kimberly Anderson, 480 Medina Street in Oregon. So in terms of school board meetings in the past 17 months, I think that what we have learned is those who are angry or upset are far more vocal than those who are more malleable to the current situation. And this is how it should be, or else your meetings would last for hours and hours and hours. But the issue with this model is that when all you hear are the people who are angry demanding change, it's easy to forget the message of the voices that are quiet. So in this spirit, I have 4 points that I'd like to make tonight. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the school board, the administrative team, the faculty, and the staff of OSD for the work that they have done for continuing to move forward with what they, as a group, determined to be the best course for the collective whole. While I may not agree with some decisions, I agree with the spirit in which they are made and the concept that in your positions, you are afforded access to more and better information than perhaps I am afforded. 2, I want to remind you again that the happy voices are quieter than the unhappy ones. 3, I want to remind you that a year ago, there were a lot of parents who stood up and said that they would do anything, absolutely anything, to get their children back in the building. And as you look at the decision on whether or not to have masks be part of the model for the start of the school year, while the Delta variant is on the rise, I want to encourage you to be proactive and think about the benefit of masks in order to be able to keep our kids in the building. I see this as a better option than unmasking and perhaps having to return to a virtual model if the cases become overwhelming, because none of us can predict at this time how things are going to unfold. Finally, as we enter into this school year where people are looking to argue that there has been a learning loss and there is still the requirement of standardized tests to potentially validate this claim, I want to take this opportunity to remind the school board of the kinds of learning that occurs that will never be measured by a standardized test. All of the following are growths that I saw in my own children in the past 12 to 18 months. Time management, communication, both written and verbal, self-advocacy, problem solving, life skills like cooking, which I totally appreciated, prioritizing, self-awareness, compassion and empathy, and the biggest one yet has been the fact that you don't have control over what happens to you all the time, but you do have control in how you respond to it. Our family motto has become, you are not defined by the things that happen to you, but how you respond. From this, I have seen their tenacity and resiliency grow. I encourage you to think about this as you think about standardized tests and the masking issue that is in front of you tonight, and to thank you again for your service. Have a good night.
Rob Palmer.
I'm Rob Palmer. I'm a taxpayer who lives at 633 Prairie Grass Road in Oregon. On March 8th, the board held a discussion about OSD's transgender education curriculum. Krista Flanagan stated, "This school district has never tried to hide anything. I have spent weeks sifting through multiple public records requests to verify the truthfulness of Ms. Flanagan's statement. On February 15th, Michelle Kretschmann and Dawn Donner Chambers presented a professional development program titled Best Practices for Supporting Transgender Non-Binary Students and Their Allies. Ms. Kretschmann instructed faculty and staff to hide students' transgender transition from parents by using preferred names and pronouns in class, but using the legal name and pronouns when discussing the student with the parents, a practice that explicitly violates District Policy 431 and District Policy 324. Despite the fact Ms. Kretschmann's instruction violates OSD board policies, OSD Superintendent Leslie Bergstrom and OSD General Counsel Gina Jonan approved the presentation. At the March 8th board meeting, Ms. Flanagan, Tim LeBrun, Troy Pankratz, and Heather Garrison made remarks attempting to connect best practices to the anti-hate speech policy. I would like to focus on one of those remarks. Ms. Garrison, we want to confirm and to avoid any misunderstanding that other than the anti-hate speech policy, there has been no other change to a policy as it relates to equity and inclusion this year. Dr. Leslie Bergstrom, no. Heather Garrison, I just wanted to make that clear because maybe there's some confusion that the anti-hate speech is readily available, and we will continue the discussion we had back in November was about guidelines, not a policy change or addition. But I want to make that very clear. I want to remind you that Dr. Bergstrom had approved best practices presentation and was aware of the instruction Ms. Kretschmann provided. So her statement is misleading and false. Ms. Garrison, was your question intended to mislead and deceive district parents? Or were you ignorant of District Policies 324 and 431? To better understand the origins of the anti-hate speech policy, I requested drafting documents from a Guy A. Williams, a UW law student who'd been paid for, quote, professional services, unquote. Ms. Jonan denied my request, claiming attorney-client privilege. On July 15th, I requested that Dr. Bergstrom make a limited waiver of attorney-client privilege in the interest of transparency. 16 business days later, I have not received an answer. On April 26th, I appeared before you and sent you an email asking a number of questions about best practices for supporting transgender non-binary students and their allies, and the gender support plan. Today is August 9th. I have still not received answers to my questions. I found far more examples of OSD's deception and subterfuge as I researched best practices, but I'm limited in the amount of time I can speak because of OSD Policy 180.05, which is one of the privileged policies that Ms. Flanagan and Dr. Bergstrom do enforce. Ms. Flanagan, hiding information about students from the parents, false statements about changes in policy, and refusing to answer questions from the community.
Mr. Palmer.
That's okay, I'll finish. All prove that your statement, the school district has never tried to hide anything that is untrue, is not true. As parents
Mr.
and
Palmer,
taxpayers,
your time is up.
As parents and taxpayers, we deserve school board members who tell us the truth. Thank you.
Amanda and Ben Bartlett. Amanda and Ben Bartlett are next. One more time, Amanda. Nope, don't want to speak? Okay. Heather Motif.
My name is Heather Motif. I live at 308 East Lincoln Street here in Oregon. So, as the last year and a half has demonstrated, vaccines and masks are the best tools that we have to effectively protect ourselves and others from COVID-19. As we all know, at this time, children under 12 do not have a choice to be vaccinated. With the new Delta variant cases surging and showing to be more contagious, including for children, new data showing vaccinated people can still spread COVID-19, it is more important than ever to continue to mask to protect the children in our community who are not able to be vaccinated at this time. The CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Dane County Public Health all say that masks should be worn in schools. These are the current CDC recommendations directly from their website as of today. Due to the circulating and highly contagious Delta variant, CDC recommends universal indoor masking by all students age 2 and older, staff, teachers, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. Many of us have given up our lives over the last year and a half, staying isolated, limiting our outings to essentials, canceling vacations, not seeing our friends and our family, and always wearing a mask. We've now been vaccinated, yet we're not able to resume our normal lives as a concern for our children makes that impossible. While the risk of death or hospitalization may be small for children, I am mostly concerned with the potential long-term damage to their health after a COVID infection. Working in a medical clinic, I see not only adults, but 8, 9, 10-year-olds being sent to cardiologists and pulmonologists with heart and lung damage. Having chronic health problems myself, I will do anything in my power to prevent my kids from being saddled with potentially lifelong health issues. I want them to return to school, to soccer, and to swim. And I want them to do that safely. We stayed online the entire last school year and gave up all extracurriculars. If others are not capable of following the CDC, American Academy of Pediatric and public health guidelines to protect others and the vulnerable people in our schools with no choice to be vaccinated, they have an online option. Those of us who are willing to follow those public health guidelines should have the opportunity to finally return our children to school safely after doing our part to protect not just ourselves, but our community since the beginning of the pandemic. While we have amazing vaccination rates in our county and in Oregon, there's a large portion of the population that has no choice of being protected right now. And until our children under 12 can have the option to be vaccinated, I beg you to please do one thing that we know that can protect those who are unvaccinated and require masks in our schools. Thank you.
Next up is Anna Doyle. Not speaking? Okay. Oh, okay. How much time do we have?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ina Doyle. I wasn't anticipating speaking tonight, even though I signed up, but I felt compelled to come up here. I live at 578 South Broke Avenue. I have 2 different children in the school district. My older son is going to be a sophomore this year and has special needs. So I figured it'd probably be best to represent that community and let you know my experience this past year. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, but. And my other son is going into 6th grade this year at RCI. I have tremendous respect and appreciation for the staff at Oregon School District, specifically Candace behind me. I just have a lot of adoration for the staff and what they've done for my older son this year especially. I do believe that there is a sensory component for some students within the school district that is not being addressed. His younger brother does not have these same sensory issues, but I can speak on the behalf that he's an incredibly social child, polar opposite of my older child, and his demeanor and mental health has completely declined this past year, which I'm sure a lot of other parents have experienced as well. He has no ambition to go to school this year, which is incredibly heartbreaking for me because he enjoys his friends, he enjoys the staff, he's very social, as I said. The fact that he would have to wear a mask, I believe, would restrict his just his demeanor overall. He just was incredibly depressed every time he would come home from school, and that just broke my heart. And I just think that there should be choices and options for our students. Not everybody is in the same cookie cutter box. My older son, it was really difficult for him to have to wear a mask and for him to understand that that was part of his daily routine. And now we've trickled into this summer where he goes to a United Cerebral Palsy summer camp in which they do not require these children, vaccinated or unvaccinated, to participate with masks on. I just believe that there is a better way to do this, where we could give options. I know many other school districts within the area have been really creative with different learning pods and social distancing in order to facilitate those children that may not be able to maintain wearing a mask all day long. I mean, my older son has more of the understanding of, I would say, more of a kindergartner, and for him to have to wear it and within the high school all day and transition, all these different transitions for him, it's just been very hard. And I really encourage you to consider those children that do have sensory issues, the children that we feel have been really impacted mentally with their mental health this past year on having to wear the masks. So I just encourage you to consider options for those children and to facilitate all of us, just not within that specific box. Look outside the box for some of these children. So thank you for your time.
Next up is Erika Quam. Erika Quam? Okay. Malia King.
My name is Malia King, and I live at 150 Joanna Circle. I'm speaking in favor of following the Public Health Department and recommending masks for... Louder?
Just a little closer.
I'm speaking in favor of following the Public Health Department and recommending masks for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students for K through 12. I would also request that we acknowledge PHMDC's guidance that people in general do not need to wear masks outside. Our Public Health Department has laid out in great detail the quarantining requirements for both masked and unmasked students K through 12, regardless of the vaccines. Sharing the Public Health Department's instructions with each family prior to the school year will make sure everyone's aware of the rules. Most students will likely mask up to avoid missing school, but those students who do not mask should be able to do so and will not wear masks for their own personal reasons, and that needs to be respected. The individual needs of students and the individual risks associated with COVID should be evaluated by each family. Families alone should decide whether their students will be going to school via virtual learning, in-person learning, or homeschooling, whichever is the best option for their families. Families also should be given the option to decide if their kids need to wear masks. In the event OSD decides to require masks, I would like to know what governing entity they plan on using to update their decisions, since PHMDC is not currently requiring masking. Last year, PHMDC required everyone to be masked due to the pandemic, but we are currently not under any emergency orders, and they are not requiring masking. We have 84% of Oregon over the age of 12 vaccinated. There must be a plan for who to consult to end the masking requirements for students if the plan is to go above and beyond the current instruction from governing institutions. Dane County has one of the highest vaccination rates in the country, which should translate into more autonomy for decision-making for our families. I feel like at some point we are going to have to stop assuming that we can public policy our way out of COVID. Our pandemic spike was November 17th at a 7-day average case rate of 489 cases. At that time, we were all staying home, nobody was going to work or school, and we were all masked up at all times. Staying home to stop the spread and flatten the curve still resulted in a spike of cases. Our last major pandemic was from the flu, and we still see the flu every year. COVID and the flu have a lot of similarities in the 0 to 17 age range, and we are incredibly lucky that COVID almost never has serious health implications for kids under 18, just like the flu. In fact, the risk of serious health complications and death from the flu and from COVID are almost identical for kids under the age of 18. The CDC has listed COVID deaths for those under 17 in the last year at 349. Flu deaths from the 2018 to 2019 year were between
Malia, your time is up.
199 and 434. At some point, we're going to have to return decision-making control back to the parents. I think we should also consider that there has not been any emergency use authorization issued for kids under 12. Will OSD decide that they're going to require masks on kids under 12 until they're old enough to get a vaccine?
Malia, your time is up.
If it's decided not to allow parents to make this decision tonight, then when? Parents need to be able to make their own decisions for their kids.
Next up is Erika Getzlaff. I hope I'm saying that right. Erika Getzlaff. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name.
I answered to anything.
Okay.
My husband's name, he did that to me. So I'm Erika Getzlaff. I live at 317 Cassander Way, and I really appreciate, you just hearing, kind of both or all sides of this topic. I just want to share a little bit of a personal story that I actually really don't ever share, so it's kind of sensitive, but I think it's a really important perspective to hear, just as you consider the rules for our schools for masking for this year. One of my children, 4 years ago, got post-infectious autoimmune encephalitis after having strep throat. that she actually caught in the kindergarten classroom at OSD. She recovered after a lot of trauma of our family, but we promptly put her in a bubble. We masked her, we sprayed her with sanitizer every time she touched something. We didn't go to birthday parties. We pulled her out of her extracurriculars. I mean, so essentially we did COVID 4 years ago. And at one point I brought her into her primary care doctor, and, you know, we were kind of talking about how things were going, and she really convicted me. And she was like, you have got to stop. You are affecting her emotional development with all of these things that you are doing. Get her out of this bubble and let this girl live her life. And as a healthcare provider myself, I mean, I just kind of sat back like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing to keep my child healthy. And she's like, but you're not. And so I share that just because, you know, I thought I was doing my best as a parent to protect her physical health, but I was doing it completely at the detriment of her emotional and developmental health. And she was right. The doctor was right. I let her out of that bubble, and the doctor said, if she gets sick again, we'll treat her again. And I was like, you're right. And my daughter is the happiest, healthiest, most fun-loving, smart child you will ever meet. And she lives her life within some boundaries, and we do a lot of things to support our health. But you know, one of the things that I learned was how important their emotional and psychological health is, and we've witnessed both sides. And I just really encourage you, I mean, if we continue to mask our kids, I mean, there's always going to be something to mask them over. Strep throat, that's everywhere. And nobody wore a mask for my daughter, and they still don't, and I don't expect them to. But if I want her to be safe, if we go on an airplane, she wears a mask. That's my choice as a parent. And I just hope that you'll offer choices for all parents, because that balance between emotional and physical health is completely different for every child. And I just really implore you to allow parents to make that decision for their own kids. So thank you for considering it.
Don and Sarah Penley. Don and Sarah Penley.
No, I didn't know we were signing up to talk.
Oh, okay. Robert Head. You don't want to speak? You don't want to speak? All right. Andrew Seitz. Sorry. Next time.
Hi, good evening. My name is Andrew Seitz. I live at 346 Riviera Street in Oregon, and I have 4 kids who 3 are currently attending the school in the district, and 1 has graduated. We moved into this area in 2005. We chose Oregon because, you know, from everything we read and everything we studied, it looked like a great school district. And we came to Oregon because we thought that this area shared our values. I've been really disturbed how our community and our nation really has handled this whole pandemic situation. It seems like we face this with a mindset of fear, and that's not how America should work. America was made great based on empowering the individual. I think we need to teach and reinforce our kids that lesson, the strength of the individual to do what's best for themselves and their family and make the life that they want for themselves. But I think our decision making is being governed by fear right now. COVID-19 is not the Spanish flu. It's not the bubonic plague. We can't be walking around teaching our kids and acting like it is. So what I'm asking is for choice. Empower the parents who care the most about their kids to decide what's best for them, whether they should wear masks or not. So I'm strongly opposed to mandating a mask for students in the school district. And I hope you will see that you, the board, you have the burden of proving why the benefits of wearing a mask, if you decide to mandate it, outweigh the harm. You have the burden of proof. It's not on us to prove why we shouldn't wear a mask. Wearing a mask is not normal. So I hope that we're going to hear some very thoughtful discussion on benefits and harm and what your decisions will be. And again, I just want to reinforce that, you know, I think we need to encourage our kids not to be afraid in this. It's been too much of that. They've missed too much. They've missed sports. They've missed in-person interaction. We're making them wear these ridiculous masks all the time.
Time
It's
is up,
just,
Mr. Seitz.
it's very frustrating. I thank you for your time, and hopefully we come to a good decision later tonight.
Okay, we'll finish. Bill Foster? Oh, you're speaker later. Jennifer Hans.
Hi there. My name is Jennifer Hans. I live on Vineyard Road in Fitchburg. First, I want to express gratitude to Dr. Bergstrom, the administration, and the school board for working tirelessly to inform your decisions during the most unusual year in our lifetime. It is not easy to be publicly badgered and harassed nearly every day for every small or large decision you have to make, and it certainly takes time away from work for our kids. Second, I thank you for withstanding daily pressure to ignore public health guidelines and American Academy of Pediatrics. There have always been fringe opinions and experts that claim to know more, but I appreciate as a school district that serves 4,000 kids that you simply should not blaze a new trail against local public health experts and AAP and hope it is the right one. This allowed us to have a 2020 school year that wasn't riddled with excessive closures and quarantines. Just like other health safety protocols that schools develop and implement, this school district decision does not belong in the hands of parents right now. I, nor likely anyone else, want masks on our kids. Nobody wants masks on our kids. But most of us adults understand this is a necessary part of the puzzle that allows school to be as close to normal as possible. As always, it's a risk versus reward ratio. I hope that OSD requires masks, and in turn, that allows our district to not have ultra-conservative quarantine and spacing protocols. I hope that masks as a preventative measure means that our kids can play together like normal in classrooms, work together in groups, and can stay in school without having to endure unexpected virtual learning shutdowns. I expect this will be a fluid decision and will change with time and data, and I'm confident that you will make the decision that makes sense. Research is just beginning on the long-term effects of having this disease. I personally know 2 kids that have long COVID. One has COVID-induced asthma, and one just has chronic health problems now. Especially, research has not been done in kids with long COVID. Gray matter reduction, anxiety and depression increased post-COVID, COVID-induced asthma, myocarditis trends, to name a few. Now is not the time to throw caution to the wind and hope for the best. In 2 years, I think everyone in here would prefer to look back on this decision and think masks may have been overkill versus the alternative of how many illnesses and long-term effects could we have saved with masks. Thank you.
Next up is Nikki Holton. Is Nikki coming up to speak? You can after we take Kim Smith. Oh, okay. Then yes.
Hi. My name is Kimberly Smith, and I live here in Oregon. Need my address?
Yes.
No, okay. 775 Edenberry Lane. Okay. So I just want to tell you guys why I have chosen to homeschool my children. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. My 23-year-old daughter graduated from Oregon in 2016. So I have one that's already been through the Oregon School District. The first reason is because of the masks. And, you know, the statement that parents don't get to choose is why I'm homeschooling my children. We have lived a life of normalcy for the past 18 months. Nothing has changed for my children. We go out, we play. They don't wear masks. The damage that they're doing is incalculable, and I refuse to put masks on my kids. When you guys said to put masks on 4K kids for 2 hours a day, that's absurd. I saw in May children playing on the playground with masks. That's insane. That is insane. That's abuse. And I'm so disappointed. You have to offer families a choice. That is a huge, huge, huge point for a lot of these families. They need to be able to choose. If I can choose to take any sort of medication to keep my health up, I should be able to choose masks or not. And that's perfectly fine if you want to choose masks. It's not a judgment about wearing masks, only to deny families the ability to choose. Number two, why I will not put my kids in the Oregon School District is because my daughter was exposed to dildos during a gay straight alliance event back in 2014, I believe. I didn't know this until 2016 when she told me. You guys cannot handle, this school district cannot handle the sexuality of pretty much anything. Dealing with sexuality, you can't handle what happens outside, what the kids learn from. And so I oppose this, I don't know, what is it called? There's a new policy in terms of tolerance. It's unacceptable. And I wish I would have known sooner. I would have came to you guys and complained heavily. Children of the age of 14 should not be exposed to dildos during a club. In terms of critical race theory, there are black people and people of color who oppose it. I'm one of them. It doesn't belong in schools. And I know that you guys say that it really isn't there, but you know it's going to be. It is a...
Time is up.
Excuse me, a wave. And I'm going to do my best to encourage other families to homeschool. Because what is happening is absolutely unacceptable. Families should not accept this. You can homeschool, and it will be okay.
Kim, your time is up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Okay, that concludes public comment, the public comment portion of this meeting. We are now moving on to OEA report. Is Nate, yours? Come on up, Nate.
My name is Nathan Johnson. I'm a teacher at the high school, and I'm here tonight in my role as the OEA spokesperson. So tonight, the OEA has two messages to share with the school board and the wider community. First, among the items on the agenda tonight is the 2021-2022 Employee Handbook. The Oregon Education Association would like to once again thank the district for including teacher voice in considering changes to the handbook. While there may be disagreements along the way, we are heartened to work in a district where teacher input is welcomed and we can work towards a consensus on handbook changes. Thank you to the administration and school board for continuing to include teachers in this critical process. Secondly, the OEA has a formal statement about the upcoming school year. The Oregon Education Association Board of Directors, as the duly elected representatives of the teachers of the Oregon School District, remains committed to creating a learning environment that prioritizes student health and safety. In these challenging times, the teachers of Oregon School District remain committed to delivering the best possible educational experience to all students. As we demonstrated over the last 18 months, we continue to build relationships with students and share our passion for learning, even when presented with unprecedented challenges. While we are frustrated and saddened by the resurgent pandemic, we are hopeful that we can again meet this challenge. While it is clear that vaccination remains highly protective against serious illness, with the emergence of the Delta variant, vaccinated individuals are now much more likely to pass the virus along to others. Beyond this, our students under the age of 12 are not yet eligible for vaccination. We recognize that measures must be taken to mitigate the spread of this new variant and any subsequent variants. Throughout this pandemic, the Oregon School District has consulted experts and maintained a science-based approach to decision-making. The OEA would like to reiterate its support for this approach. Beyond school-based measures, the OEA also urges those in the community who are not yet vaccinated to strongly consider getting themselves vaccinated and their children ages up 12 and up vaccinated. Once a vaccine becomes available to younger children, we urge parents to consider having them vaccinated as well. The staff, students, board, families, and community members of the Oregon School District have the power to protect our community. The OEA stands committed to providing a high-quality education to our students while also protecting the health and safety of our community. Please join us.
Thank you, Nate. We do, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a student report because school has not started yet, so we'll look forward to that once school starts. So next on the agenda is C, action items. First up is Policy 565, COVID illness, and Policy 566, COVID-19 protective measures, hygiene and cleaning. As the board does know, we did vote on both of these policies, and they passed 6-0 on August 10th of 2020. So the way we're going to handle this evening is like we typically do, is Leslie's going to make a presentation, and then once that presentation is over, board members will have an opportunity to ask questions. If you want the policies to stand as is, no action is needed. If there are board members that would like to amend these policies, then we will entertain motions at that time. So I will turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom, and then we'll have the discussion.
Thank you. So this evening, policies 565 and 566 contain the administrative guidelines relative to COVID-related safety practices. And safety is actually only one of the aspects of our overall fall plan, which we are entitling Back Together, 21-22. So our priorities in coming back together this fall, of course, first are mental and physical wellness and high quality teaching and learning. So we'll be talking later in the presentation about some of our higher level plans for high quality teaching and learning. And for this portion of the presentation, which is specific to policies 565 and 566, we'll be speaking to the wellness component of our priorities. So our goal as an administrative team is to offer a safe in-person learning environment and keep our kids in school with minimal disruptions. That's our goal. Our students, in-person instruction, minimal disruption. So as part of the planning to move us toward that end, we will be talking about the considerations and the implications of those considerations, the objectives of our plan, and the highlights of our plan. So one of the really important things that was discussed tonight is the idea of masks optional versus masks required. And that is something that as an administrative team we have spent quite a bit of time discussing and researching, in addition to seeking out the input, particularly related to research from multiple people in the, multiple medical professionals in the area. And one of the graphics that we thought really told the story well and was highly related to our desire to keep our students in school with minimal disruptions. And that is how to create an environment with the lowest risk and the least amount of COVID-19 spread possible. So when you look at this and you see the risk level, the chance of spreading COVID-19 with two people who are unmasked, or a person who is potentially COVID positive and a masked individual, you see the first one is very high chance of spreading, the second one is high. The medium chance is when we have a person who has a COVID-19 positive situation and the person next to them or around them who is unmasked. That's a medium level. You get to where you would have a low opportunity for spread of COVID-19 when you have both parties masked.
and both parties masked with less than 6 feet together. And I think or 6 feet apart. And that's really important to point out, is that any of our planning needs to take into account that once all of our students are back, because remember last year it was about 25% of our students toward the end remained online. Now that all of our students will be coming back with very few exceptions, and I'll share those numbers later, we're not going to be able to keep students 6 feet apart. They will definitely be less than that. We would be planning for as close to 3 feet apart as possible. So we wouldn't, no matter what we did, be able to get to the very low chance here because we cannot guarantee 6 feet. But we certainly could, in a masked environment, a mask required environment, get to a point where this would be considered a low chance of spreading COVID-19. And of course, that helps keep our kids and staff safe and healthy, but it also leads to minimal disruptions because it leads to fewer quarantines. And that's another really important component, is that this summer, the CDC guidelines related to quarantines changed. And if you are in an all-masked environment, anyone who is a close contact with an individual who has a positive case of COVID-19 no longer needs to quarantine. So if your child is in a masked classroom and they're even sitting in a desk right next to another student who is COVID-19 positive, there would be no requirement to quarantine, because the masks and the other layered protection strategies, such as high-quality ventilation systems, hand washing hygiene, and some of the other things that we will be discussing, it would lead to a situation where no one would need to miss school. In a mask-optional environment, it would lead to more students missing school. And you might think that that doesn't seem like a lot until you take a look at some of our specific numbers. But before I show that to you, I want to just give you an example. So if we have a student who comes to school with a headache, goes to class, sits near students and near other students, as I mentioned, we are not able to stay 6 feet apart. During lunch, unmasked scenario where the student is within 6 feet of his peers also. And then that night, the student goes home, he has a fever and a cough, he comes back to school the next day, ends up in the nurse's office for COVID-like symptoms, and eventually the test comes back positive. Well, what's the implication of that? In a mask-required environment, very few, if any, quarantines would be expected. It would really only be about anyone who sat next to the person who had COVID at lunch. In a mask-optional environment, it would be anybody who was in 6 feet of the students within a classroom. And if we want to be able to run classrooms in a way that we know is educationally sound, which means little kids have circle time, we have small group work, we have students moving around, we have students interacting. If we want to be able to run a classroom in that manner and it's a mask optional environment, we would be looking at a significant number of quarantines. And considering one of our goals is minimal disruption, that seems counter to our goals. Now you might think, what does that matter? Well, when you look at the last dashboard of the school year, we actually had 2,112 incidents of quarantine in our student population. Now, granted, some students are definitely in there more than once because they had more than one exposure that required a quarantine, but that's a lot of missed school. And in a masked required environment, we would really only see quarantines if a student was next to someone at lunch, or if they played extraordinarily closely outside during recess, because that would be an unmasked environment. But students are usually running around a lot at recess, so we don't expect to have a lot of generation of close contacts in that environment. Not to mention the fact that our staff, we had 198 incidences of quarantine amongst our staff last year.
With mask, or what is it?
This is our portion. You guys had your chance for public comment, and now it's our turn to have a presentation, and the board will discuss. Thank you.
I think it's important to note, and to the question that came, is that last year, even though students and staff were wearing masks, that didn't influence the quarantine requirement. This year it does. This year, in a masked environment, we don't need to quarantine.
If you're going to continue to talk during this time, you'll be asked to leave. We gave you respect. We expect the same respect. Thank you.
If our goal is to offer a safe in-person learning environment and to keep students in our schools with minimal disruptions, this means implementing a layered health and safety plan, utilizing methods that have worked in the past, and relying on the recommendations of health experts.
We will take a pause for 2 minutes until people feel like if they want to leave, they can leave the room. Thank you. 2 minutes. Thank you. Dr. Bergstrom, please continue.
So, as part of the administration, excuse me, everybody. So, as part of the administrative team's recommendations moving forward, with our goal in mind and relying on the advice of health experts, then we would recommend requiring masks indoors for teachers, all staff and students, regardless of vaccination status. Federal regulations currently require masks for all riders on school transportation, and of course we would abide by that, and that includes our co-curricular events. I also want to point out that the advice that's coming from health experts is that masks outside is optional. We would also continue to emphasize the daily home health screening, our Panther Pledge, because we know how important it is for students who are not feeling well to stay home. That's another one of the strategies to help keep the school environment safe. Of course, personal hygiene and hand washing etiquette is as important now as it has ever been throughout the pandemic. And distancing. We know that we will be trying to keep at least 3 feet of distance between our students to the greatest extent possible. However, I also want to point out that while we will set up our classrooms in that respect, we will be able to engage in the instructional strategies that we deem to be most appropriate for whatever it is the students are learning in a masked environment. We won't have to worry about constantly keeping students distanced the way that we had to worry in the past. A part of this is just the result of the new conclusions that are emerging from studying what happened last year in schools. Distancing is very important when masks are not worn, for example, when eating. And with this consistent and correct masking, we're expecting our school activities to occur as they have in the past. Eating at school, both breakfast and lunch will be available. The federal government program has been extended, so they'll be available free to all students at school. We'll be distancing at lunch to the greatest extent possible, and of course during snack time. Transportation, as I mentioned earlier, masks would be required. Windows open when possible, and we are still very open to hiring bus supervisors to assist on the buses, and especially as we move into the school year and we're able to set up seating charts, et cetera, to help if there were any situations that would require contact tracing. Cleaning and disinfecting, we know now that that's important, but it's probably not as important as some of the other strategies that we put into place. However, soap and water will be easily accessible in every classroom for wiping surfaces throughout the day, and of course, the thorough cleaning nightly. Ventilation This is something that we have always paid a lot of attention to in the Oregon School District. And thankfully, we have some very high quality systems working within our schools. So we feel very confident related to our ventilation systems. And we will add high quality air filters in music classrooms where there is blowing into wind instruments or singing, because we've also learned that we can operate those classrooms in fairly close to a normal way. And we just want to add in that extra layer of ventilation given the fact that we'd be singing and blowing. Contact tracing. So, of course, we would work with state and local officials to trace, work with contact tracing when it's necessary. We'd be implementing the quarantine protocols when they're necessary, and maintaining that we would commit to communicating to all close contacts if there has been one, and maintaining the district dashboard so everybody within the district can see what's happening and how we have been influenced by what's happening outside of school and in it. And then another really exciting thing is through our partnership with Orchards, we have the opportunity to do COVID testing right here in school when students are symptomatic at school and parents give their consent. That would allow us to do an immediate rapid antigen test. It would test for influenza and for SARS-CoV-2. And then we'd also on site be able to do an immediate PCR test that would be sent to the Wisconsin State Hygiene Lab. So we'd be able to provide that service for our families, which we think would really help speed up any quarantines that may be necessary, speed up the implementation of quarantines or contact tracing procedures. And then, of course, we would definitely continue to encourage vaccination when people are eligible. And I'm very thankful, as it was mentioned today, that we live in a county with such a high vaccination rate and in a community with such a high vaccination rate. That's a very positive thing. Unfortunately, when it comes to transmission within the schools, which is what we're trying to prevent, is transmission in the schools, because we're trying to prevent illness and we're trying to give the viruses the least number of opportunities possible within our school walls to transmit. Vaccination's an important step in that. So one of the things that was mentioned here, there was a lot of discussion related to the health guidance. And I think one of the things, as someone who's needed to monitor this closely over the course of time, is that it is extraordinarily clear right now and consistent from the health organizations that provide guidance related to schools. They've been remarkably consistent related to what we are able to do and how we are able to stay open. They all say we need to be open, and they all tell us the exact same ways we need to do it. That's the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Department of Health Services here in Wisconsin, Public Health, the entire UW Pediatric Department, which has put together an excellent website with resources. And so for people who are very interested in the research, and I applaud their interest in it, I urge them to I would take a look at the UW Health Pediatric Department website, as it has a significant number of studies, or it has a lot of the organizations that you see here, they've linked there. And in those links, they have lists of resources, studies that they have consulted to come to the conclusions that they have come to and to give the advice that they are given. This comes from public health related to our local data. And you can certainly see that we have a rise in cases at the moment. And I think that schools can certainly do their parts to ensure that they're not a place of transmission. So given all that I've shared with you, as an administrative team, we believe there's a preponderance of evidence that connects our goal of our students being in in-person learning with minimal disruption, a preponderance of evidence that links our goal to the safety measures that we've presented to you. So it is our recommendation that we maintain policy 565 and 566 as currently written, because it allows us to implement policies that are in alignment with the guidelines from public health, which also happen to be the guidelines from the other health organizations that I had listed a couple of slides previous.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. So as I mentioned earlier, this portion of the agenda will give us an opportunity to ask questions. If board members would like to make a motion that would change 565 or 566, you also, it is one unique evening where if you want to address public comments that were on this topic, you can do so because it was noticed on our agenda. So I think what I would like to do, instead of a traditional round robin, I think this requires some back and forth between board members so we can have more of a discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with one board member and they can make one point, and then if people would like the floor to address that point, you can just ask for the floor for me so we can have more of a back and forth discussion but not over each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Troy. So Troy, you have the floor. Lucky you. And then we can have kind of a back and forth discussion, as well as Kevin. I will have you jump in first after Troy, okay?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we'll turn you up. It is just the board.
Okay, so I guess I'd like to start tonight by recognizing all of our speakers this evening. I really appreciate you coming out and sharing your thoughts and your passion. Obviously, this is a pretty passionate topic, and I just want to recognize that. And I want you all to know that I'm sitting here and I'm truly listening to everything that you're saying. This is a decision that really weighs pretty heavily on my mind, and I will tell you that 2 weeks ago I was in a different place than I am tonight. 2 weeks ago I was looking forward to a year where we'd be able to be mask optional for, I should say, we'd be looking at a beginning of the year where we'd be masks optional for 712 school. My thinking has changed over the past 2 weeks due to the environment that's out there. So we've seen the spikes in cases, and we've also seen all of our experts, all of the agencies that Leslie mentioned kind of changed their guidance due to where we're at. So I guess just want to reiterate that I'm hearing you, and I'm considering it, or I'm considering my position. Just a few points that resonated with me that were made tonight. Children under 12 do not have a choice to be vaccinated at this point, and kids have missed too much already. So for me, it's really critical to avoid any further, mitigate as much as we can the schooling that we're going to have to miss due to quarantine. One of the speakers talked about protecting the health and safety of our community, and we know that the no mask environment leads to more students missing school. And then, the final point is that there's trade-offs, right? So there's trade-offs with this decision. My position right now is not the time to remove mitigation experts, as we are seeing cases increase among both vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And what I've been hearing is that it's all about probability. So we have high caseload in the communities. We need to basically dress in layers for the weather. So when we have high cases out there, we need to react accordingly, and we can adjust those layers as the temperature changes. So as the case counts come down, we will get to a point where masks can be optional again. I think about the household contact. So even if we were to be mask optional in the 712 environment, that there's household contact, and an outbreak in our 712 buildings would be transmitted to our K6 students, and we could be looking at mass quarantine, and those students are then out of school for 7 to 10 days. That's just not acceptable to me. We've learned that kids need to be in school. We need to do everything we can to keep kids in school. So I guess that's my position right now. I would just reiterate that the advisory groups are remarkably consistent with their guidance, and I support it.
Thanks, Troy. Does anyone have anything to address specific to what Troy said before making a different point? I'm sorry, somebody? What? Oh, no, this is only for board discussion right now. Kevin? You have the floor. Yes. Can everybody hear Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. All right. First of all, I want to apologize for not being there. Physically, I have a business commitment that I absolutely could not get out of. I feel bad. Who are typically the most vulnerable are vaccinated. And I want to thank publicly, Bob Head, who's a member of our community, who has done a great job of sharing data for us to base our decisions off of. That being said, the information about, the requirements for quarantining and how that would potentially expose us to having kids missing school because of the need to quarantine has me thinking slightly differently. And I want to continue the discussion, obviously, in this board meeting for the time I have left that I'm going to be able to participate. I believe in parent choice, but I also believe there's other considerations when it comes to, the impact that Leslie was speaking of when it comes to quarantining. I do want to state, and I'm assuming I'm going to get another shot at this, Krista, but I do want to state that I do believe that Policy 565 COVID illness policy needs to be amended because when it was formed at a time where our medical advisory board was not even in existence, as one example. So we've learned a lot over the 17, 18 years. It gives us a little flexibility in terms of, what we can base our decision-making on, which should be multifaceted. And I think it needs more flexibility. I can leave it at that at this point until everyone else has had comments, but I will definitely be looking for us to discuss how black and white that policy is, because I think there needs to be more thought put into it and more data points, and put us into a position in the future to have some more flexibility and use logic when it comes to making these decisions. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So we'll give everybody a chance to discuss and then come back to you, and you would need to have a motion on the table for us to discuss that. So you would need to have amended language that requires a second, so then we could have that discussion on that per Robert's Rules of Order. So be ready if that's what you would like to do when we come back to you. Okay, who would like to go next? Go ahead, Tim.
So I'm going to pick up from where Kevin left off. First of all, I too really appreciate the people who've shown up tonight. They're obviously passionate about their kids and their kids' education. I know that our teachers and our administrators are passionate about our kids and their education. And so I sincerely appreciate the participation tonight. We've learned a lot in the last year and a half. I have learned a lot in the last year and a half. And when we put together this policy, again, this is picking up from where Kevin left off. When we put together this policy, we were very specific about where we were going to gain our direction. And very specifically, it says, the Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness and protective measures related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with Public Health Madison and Dane County. And that's really where my issue is. Kevin mentioned that we have lots of data points here. Since we put together this policy in July of this past year, we formed a medical task force, a medical and mental health task force, which went beyond just what Dane County said. Now, I'm not saying we should go against what Dane County is saying. I am not saying that. All I'm saying is Dane County is a data source, an input, just like the CDC, the National Institute of Health, the Journal of American Medical Association, and all of the other people that we rely on for data. And so I think we need to recognize that in this policy. The other thing that I think, in hindsight, since this policy was put in place, and I was one of the 6 unanimous votes that put this policy in place, so I am not escaping responsibility here. I think it's a lot for our superintendent to make this decision on her own. And so my feedback here is about not so much should we mask or shouldn't we mask. It isn't about that at this moment. It's about how should we make our decision going forward. I'm not comfortable with having one source to make our decision. I'm just not. And so when I think about whether the policy, and I'm just speaking about the policy, this one sentence, whether it should be amended or changed or replaced, that's where my feedback lies. I'm not saying we should mask. Although there's lots of information from everywhere about whether or not masks make a difference or don't make a difference. There's very clear evidence on both sides on whether or not children should be masked, specifically. There's also very clear information and data about how the current transmission is happening. I think Nate mentioned in his comments from the OEA that most of the transmission that is happening today is very likely coming from folks who are vaccinated. Not from unvaccinated people to unvaccinated people. It's from vaccinated people to unvaccinated people. And so there's lots of information out there. And to rely on one source for this group as a district to make a decision, I think we need to amend the policy to recognize that. We may make the exact same decisions. And I'm okay with that.
Tim, what I'm going to tell you is, in order to discuss amending the policy, we would need a motion on the table to amend the policy.
Okay.
So if you're ready to put an amendment on the table, we can do that, or we can.
I heard we were going to hear from everybody.
Okay.
Sure.
I mean, you can do that at any time. As a board member, you
Okay.
can put a motion on the table that amends the policy.
And I am going to mention that I am going to do that. But I am going to be looking to Gina to help me form that language to amend this policy. Okay.
Continue if there's other things that you have questions or things you want to say. I just wanted to, I wanted to make sure that if we're talking about a policy, we have an active motion on the table.
Absolutely. And I am definitely going down that path. So I don't want this moment to pass and for me to be oblivious to the fact that I'm the one who has to make the motion, because I'm perfectly willing to do that. I just want to hear from everybody else. That's it for me for now.
Okay, does anyone have any comments specific to Tim's remarks or want to talk in their own? Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. So Tim, just to clarify, the bulk of the transmission is not necessarily coming from vaccinated. vaccinated people are capable of transmitting, but just from a clarity perspective, the bulk of the transmission is not coming from vaccinated individuals. And I want to share my background. I have a PhD in medical pathology. I spent 3 years of my professional career studying coronavirus, so I do believe I have some inherent knowledge in discussing some of the things that we're talking about today. I actually routinely use the knowledge that I gained as part of my research to interpret study designs, look critically at the published primary data, not just opinion papers, but the primary data, and interpret it based on the study designs and the data that are presented, rather than relying on the interpretation of others. So I do feel that it's important for me to point out that during 2020, we learned a tremendous amount. We learned that for the most part, schools were not a major source of transmission. But it's important for us to also recognize that the Delta variant is now the primary variant in our country, in our children. They are increasingly infected with the Delta variant. The percentages in our pediatric population is increasing. So that is something that we need to be aware of as we're discussing the mask option for our start of the fall. I'll stop there, and we'll have additional conversation.
Heather, would you like to go, or Anna?
I have a couple questions on Leslie's presentation, but it's not necessarily related to this policy. So should I hold on that, or should I ask now? Okay. My first one, Leslie, I'm sorry I didn't get the slide number, but in there was like a quadrant where if quarantining, if you're masked and not masked, and there, I saw a little asterisk, and I want to make sure, because I saw that it says close contact does not need to quarantine if fully vaccinated and no symptoms. So do you have any information on what that means if for the population who cannot be vaccinated?
In a masked environment, if the unvaccinated would not need to quarantine in a masked environment.
Okay, so.
Oh, thank you. I apologize.
That. In a masked environment, the unvaccinated would not need to quarantine for a close contact situation either.
Okay, got it. And then I learned something new on the federal regulations for transportation. That was a new data point for me as well. I guess I would just make the comment, I think it's interesting that they make transportation regulations and fall short of beyond that. It's just an interesting thing that the bus is federally regulated, but the school building is not. I'm looking forward to hearing Tim's amendment, so I'm going to hold some of my questions and comments just as we learn more of what the language is going to sound like. But I guess I would just bring this back. My two statements would just be a higher level than this policy. I want to echo, I think Troy and Kevin both, I think everybody thanked people for speaking. I, as a parent, have young kids in OSD, so I totally understand that, the level of advocating for your learner, and this is actually how I got involved in the school board, was starting to come to school board meetings. So I think advocacy is amazing, and I, like Kevin, wish people would do it throughout the year on all topics. I will say, we don't say this enough, how grateful I am to the school district, the administration team, the teachers, the staff, the countless hours that I only have a fraction of an idea of what everybody is spending, and that is a lot. So I just want to say, no matter what your opinion is, I see that time and effort, and I hope that people can understand that, and when they're communicating, have the utmost amount of respect, whether you agree with the decisions or not, of what this administrative team and what every single teacher and staff member has done to get here, because it is nothing short of remarkable. And it would do everybody well to remember that in their communications. That's my point, above and beyond whatever this policy is. My second point, probably more relatable, I don't have the background that Dr. Lakuta does, so I won't get into that part. It's very difficult because last year everybody wanted kids, including myself, wanted kids back in school. Now we're talking and have been talking about 5 days a week and kids are in school, so that is something great. Last year, people who wanted kids in school, Dane County wasn't the thing to listen to. Now Dane County is only recommending masks and Dane County is the thing to listen to. So it might play into Tim's point of maybe Dane County can't be the only data point, but I also think if the community can also understand, and also for the board, there has to be guiding places, whether it's the CDC, the pediatrics, whatever, all of those, the Journal of American Medicine. Because if we just don't listen to Dane County, listen to Dane County, that gets us nowhere and it gets us in a room of divided people. So I think, it's very easy to make data fit your point, whether it's masks, no masks, or shoes, no shoes, right? Fill in the blank for what we're talking about. But it's very, very easy to make your point. So I think it would be, again, I'm just going to, everybody take a step back to be reminded that many people who are, there are probably people now who want masks and don't like that Dane County is only recommending it. There's always two sides to the story, and I think we're in a very, very difficult spot. And I just want everybody to remember that as we continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, I guess, related to maybe some of the school logistics. Some of the things that we heard from our speakers are that their children experience sensory issues with wearing masks. And I think that's something that should be considered and talked about. So I guess my question would be, are there ways that students who experience those can have an exception to the mask mandate or have a doctor's note that says that they have a sensory thing with a mask? I'm just asking the question to know because I guess in my mind, if we say that masks are optional, period, that's not going to stop the spread of COVID in our schools. The graph that we saw that's just before this shows that very clearly. It doesn't work if it's just optional. It doesn't work to actually stop the spread because you still have people spreading the virus. And from what I've read about Delta, the viral load is just as high in a vaccinated individual as it is an unvaccinated individual. Just the response is different. So I don't know that we can go down the path of an optional mask situation, but I do want to be sensitive to students who may have a sensory issue. So I'm curious to know how that might be handled.
Mm-hmm. If the student has an individualized education program, an IEP, then that would be discussed in the IEP team or within the IEP team, and they would make the decisions related to what the student needed and what accommodations needed to happen. In addition to that, we always take medical excuses and honor them. So if a doctor wrote that someone had a medical reason where they could not wear the mask, we would absolutely honor that.
Thank you. Another question I have relates to the potential for more classes to be held outdoors. Is that something that's being talked about within our leadership teams and at our schools, just for mask breaks, for opportunities to be outside where you don't have to have the mask on? I guess I'm curious to know if that's something that's I would love to hear that being a big part of our learning environment in the fall and when weather cooperates.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the great things about September and October in Wisconsin is that you get to use the outdoors as much as possible. And I think beyond that, if you're dressed well. So absolutely, it's a part of the mask break protocol. But it's also, we know that students probably need their outdoor time and their recess time more now than they ever have. And so that is something that we prioritize in putting schedules together too.
Can you elaborate on that? That's my next question. What does a mask break look like? How frequently, what does that look like in our different schools?
Well, it really is dependent on the schedule, but we also know that teachers can read their classes pretty well. And there might be times when the teacher just says it doesn't matter if they've already scheduled it or not. Everybody's going outside and we're going to play for 10 minutes and you're going to take your mask off. So there's scheduled times, which would be recesses and lunch recess. And then there's times when teachers are kind of reading the room. And they know what their kids need, and they have the absolute autonomy to be able to do that with them.
Thank you. I guess I'll kind of move into where I am on my position this evening. I'm at a point where I am in support of the Public Health Madison-Dane County recommendation for universal masking in our K-12 schools, and that's for several reasons. The first of which is that we know that it's going to stop or limit the spread of COVID-19 within our schools. That's the first and foremost. We want our kids in school in person 5 days a week. That to me is a huge success. I am so happy that we are at that point right now. And if the smallest thing we need to do is wear a mask, that to me is a win. And yeah, do I want to wear this mask right now? Definitely not. But I will do it because that is what we need to do to get through this pandemic. So I'm at that point there. I also strongly am in favor of it because of the quarantine benefit. Again, we want as many of our kids in person as much as we can. And the more we can limit the number of kids who have to be on quarantine, that's a win for our students, that's a win for our families, it's a win for our school. So I support it for those reasons. Lastly, I support it because all of the medical experts that we're hearing from are in alignment on this recommendation. And I just think that it is not going in the right direction for us as a school board to not follow the recommendations of the medical experts who are studying these things, like Dr. Lakuta, who is looking at this data from a scientific perspective different than what I can find or study on my own. And so I feel very strongly that we should be following the medical experts and the advice that we're hearing from those agencies. And with that, I guess that those are my comments at this point.
Go ahead. No, I'll go. But go ahead if you want to address something that Anna said.
Not necessarily something that Anna said, but the slide just kind of cued a thought for me. And I don't know if you covered it, Dr. Bergstrom, but I guess I just want to be clear that in my interpretation that this, when we think about athletics and extracurricular activities, which we didn't talk much about, but we could have with a mask optional situation, we would be in a position where an athlete or a person on an extracurricular team is in a classroom with a mask on, being protective of themselves, but their classmate is not wearing a mask and comes down with COVID. That student wearing the mask or athlete would then be unable to participate in an upcoming event, correct?
If they were deemed a close contact, they would need to quarantine. That's correct.
And I guess my point is that, in a quarantine, in a school environment, they can do their schoolwork from home, but they can't make up that game. They can't participate in that game or that math event or that band concert if they're in that situation. So.
Anna said something that was on my notes. I just didn't get there yet. I too am looking for outside as much as possible, especially in September and October. Should we move forward with the mask requirement, it is my hope that numbers go down and the recommendations of whoever we're following at that time goes away. And so I love the idea of mask breaks, and quite frankly, I love the idea of extra recess. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic that we don't have to get into tonight. But I would be looking for how can it be part of our best practice to do, obviously, chemistry lab, probably not outside, but whatever the experts who are the teachers can manage without putting, they've had a rough 18 months. So whatever we can do to efficiently, with ease, do that, I would really like to see that on a future board meeting of how we can get whatever is possible outside. That would be one thing. And the second thing, this slide, to talk about Troy's point, nobody, I don't think anybody wants masks, like really wants them, but the whole idea of this consistency and having kids in school and having that small group work, or that, you know, the kind of experiences that the kids didn't have last year is really important to me. So that, while I don't want masks, I do really want that for all of our students. So I'll leave it at that.
Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. So, yeah, I did want to ask a question, and it was something that Troy had mentioned, but I'd like clarification. So, for students who are quarantined, obviously we're not doing an Oregon online option for this semester. I know we are outsourcing to a third party. So, for individuals who are quarantined, how do they learn while they're quarantined?
We're continuing to use Google Classroom and Seesaw as platforms. Consequently, whatever the students missed during their quarantine, they would have access to via those two platforms.
So it's really mostly independent learning?
Mostly, yes.
Okay. And I guess I would like to say that for me, I'm going to echo what has already been said. For me, it's really important to get our students in school and keep them there. I think that we know that the data from the Dane County Youth Survey is troubling, and one way to address that, the best mitigation at this point that we have, is to get our kids back in school 5 days a week, full time. And again, if that means wearing a mask, then that's what we need to do. We are being told that by CDC, American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics. The DPI just came out with their recommendations today, and as you mentioned, the UW-Madison Department of Pediatrics. I mean, all of the infectious disease experts and pediatric societies are aligned in this. Thank you.
I just realized something I wanted to clarify related to the question Troy asked, and it has to do with that little asterisk down at the bottom. Close contact does not need to quarantine if fully vaccinated. So in a classroom, if the masked student that you refer to is an athlete and is fully vaccinated and has no symptoms, they would not need to quarantine, they would need to monitor. So I just want to make sure she's our master, so I just want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, and I didn't want anyone to walk away with false information that I had given.
And I think that's an important emphasis. Again, we have a lot of experts who are telling us that we should be masking. We have a lot of experts who also tell us young kids should not be required to wear masks, that it is unhealthy, that there are mental development issues that can occur in young kids. We heard it from some of our parents. So I am not saying I am in favor of not masking as we go back to school. I want to focus on the policy and who's making the decisions around here. I want to focus on input, recommendations, because those are all recommendations. We don't have any requirements here. We have recommendations. And we also have 71 other counties in this state who, for the most part, have been in school for the last 18 months. For the most part, have been in school for the last 18 months. And so I want to step it back to the policy. I'm going to ask Gina for some help.
Tim, can I speak before we get to policy?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
That's
Krista.
okay.
I am sorry. So let me, I just have a couple of points then. We talked about schooling outdoors. And I'll lay this out to everybody here. Is being outdoors about the air exchange or about distancing? Which is it? Is it about the air or distancing? Because my next question is, and Andy's a data guy, and he's told us we have state-of-the-art air exchange systems in our buildings. And so the next question is coming to Andy. So let me repeat the question. Is it about air exchange or is it about distancing?
I would say the outdoor, where the medical experts are saying outdoors is a mask optional environment. It is about the air and circulation, because if you are still close enough to someone to be considered a close contact, you would still need to quarantine. So that would lead me to believe that the benefit of being outside is you're less likely to be exposed to the virus that someone else might be breathing out.
And that's kind of what I anticipated. Andy, in general, how often do we exchange the air in our buildings? In general. And I'm not asking for, extreme data here. I'm just saying we have really good systems.
We have good systems, and we can modify a lot of them, but not all of them. There are some systems that are in older parts of the building, which we can't tweak as much as the newer systems. So we have good systems, we have good filtration, but there are some areas that we don't have as much flexibility as other areas.
I just want to say a couple things. I think we're between a rock and a hard place here. I think we fought so hard and had a lot of division about getting our kids back in school. And so we're at that place, but instead of celebrating that our kids are coming back to school 5 days a week, we found another issue to be divided about. And I think we are viewing things these days on somebody wins and somebody loses. And I really, that troubles me, that we view that on somebody wins and somebody loses when we're a community and we need to focus on who we all care about and what's important. I think there was I give people a lot of credit for coming here to speak tonight. It takes a lot. But where I'm at is I really look to make my decisions on people that do this for a living. And so we have somebody in the audience here tonight that has done this for a living for 25 years, is an expert on vaccinations, and I'm going to put him on the spot, and I'm going to ask Dr. Temte if he would come up to the microphone. And I would like to hear from you, because you are Associate Professor of Public Health and Medicine at UW-Madison. You're an expert on vaccinations. You know something about this disease. Can you just speak to us about where you think we're at with the Delta variant? And also if you can speak to effectiveness of masking.
Certainly. Number one, we're at a place that none of us wanted to be at this point in time with the Delta variant. This is somewhere about 2.5 to 3 times more transmittable. And as some people have said, that even when you're infected while vaccinated, you're still going to produce about the same amount of virus in your secretions as somebody unvaccinated. The vaccine will oftentimes prevent becoming infected. It's about 80%, 80 to 85%, as opposed to 95%. So it does provide a great deal of protection, but it's not as good as we were hoping in terms of that transmissibility. I think one thing, though, I need to mention with this particular virus that oftentimes is inappropriately compared to other respiratory viruses, particularly influenza. Influenza is a virus that will infect your upper respiratory tract, period, unless it is a pandemic strain. COVID-19 will infect virtually every tissue in the body. It's based on the receptor. So instead of being a respiratory infection, it's a whole body infection. And think of it as a blood vessel infection. And so whereas I worry about getting influenza, I absolutely fear getting COVID-19 myself or somebody else, because it has ramifications that are early phase, and there are ramifications that we don't know, but are likely to go on and on for a very long time. When we start talking about the effectiveness of masks, on the 13th of March in 2000, the Oregon School District had its last day of class. And across the state of Wisconsin, by the 18th, all school districts shut down. And at that point in time, we started seeing masking coming on. We saw distancing. Something amazing happened that I have never seen in my professional career. Respiratory viruses largely went away. And even as schools started coming back and we started relaxing, as long as people were using masks, we didn't see respiratory syncytial virus, parainfluenza virus. We didn't see adenovirus. We didn't see human metapneumovirus. We didn't see all the other viruses that I and my team have been studying. And that isn't entirely masks. It's the masking and distancing and hand washing. However, the masks had a huge benefit. And if you look at all of the medical data that has been peer-reviewed and has been looked at critically and what we call systematic reviews and meta-analyses, they all point in the same direction. Masks provide protection. So today, I'm fully vaccinated. I got vaccinated as soon as I could. It's a safe, it's an effective vaccine. I'm tested. I've been tested weekly since this time last year as part of our surveillance we're doing for the UW. Today, I'm wearing the mask not out of fear for myself, but out of respect for everybody in this room, whether you're masked or not, because this is the one thing that I can do to try and help get through this pandemic that all of us absolutely hate. I hate wearing a mask, but when I'm in my clinic, I'm in a mask 24/7. In the medical school buildings and all the buildings on the UW campus, I'm in a mask. Why is that? Because it's been shown to be effective. So I think we have to keep in mind that the science is pretty unequivocal here, that masks are beneficial. And so I don't know what the right answer is for the school district. You guys have a lot to weigh. But, I don't want you to go into this with the idea that COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is nothing more than a case of flu. I assure you it's not. 616,000 people have died in this country. That is anywhere from 10 times for a bad flu year to 100 times for a usual flu year in terms of deaths. The last time we saw anything like this was 1918, and we did not have oxygen therapy. We did not even know that influenza was a virus. We didn't have vaccines. We didn't have antibiotics. So this has been a huge thing. It has been very divisive, but unfortunately it was made divisive very early on for all the wrong reasons. So we need to get through this, but we need to take it seriously, and we need to take it, as a unified front working together. Thank you.
Can I ask a couple more questions? One is, what do you foresee looking in the future in terms of the Delta variant? We are seeing a spike. It's not as big as some states in the South. Can you look into the future a little bit for us? And I know it's very hard, but what have you seen in terms of Europe or other locations in terms of the Delta variant and how long it lasts? And
this is so variable, I don't think you can make an honest prediction. I can make one prediction, though. And this is something that we've seen virtually every year, with one exception being last year. But when we get kids back into school, and I don't care if it's here in Wisconsin or in Florida or up in Alaska, but usually within 1 to 2 weeks, we start seeing a doubling of visitation in medical centers for respiratory infections. That's the ground that these things spread. This is where we get most of the transmission. SARS-CoV-2 has acted a little bit differently, but keep in mind that our behavior has been very, very different in the last 2 years. But in terms of the Delta variant, this is very transmissible. My prediction is we're going to continue seeing cases rise for another few weeks in Wisconsin, stabilize, drop on down. I worry that there are going to be other variants that come along that have the vaccine resistance. And as long as we have transmission going on, we're opening the door to the generation of variants. Every time we have a transmission, we're doing selection for something that works a little bit better. And so 3 months ago, we would have been talking about the Alpha variant, the B117 strain from the UK that was dominating the US. All of a sudden, this new one crops up in India. And we've gone from, 2 months ago, 8% of cases here to 93% of cases. It's just exploded. And this is what viruses do. And unfortunately, I think we're going to continue seeing this until we get this under control, which we need vaccines. We need all the different layers that we use together. So the distancing, the masking, the hand washing, the staying home while sick, the quarantine, the isolation, the testing, and all this stuff kind of goes in concert. You can't just do one of these and say it's enough. You have to do these all together and consistently and long enough time. So that's my prediction.
And I guess that's, what I'm looking for, that if we buckle down now with the things that have been proposed to us, we have a better shot quicker of getting to a place that everybody wants to be. And it's all dependent on other factors, but if we do the things like masking, vaccination, social distancing, those sorts of things, that's our best shot.
That's our best shot. One of my favorite graphics that I use whenever I do talks is called the Swiss cheese model, which you've probably all seen. And it's not one single intervention that's going to be effective here. It's everything used consistently and in concert. And so I think we have to look at the whole suite and keep in mind that we're not just aiming at protecting one individual, but all the people that person comes into contact with and all the connections that we have in our communities.
Because I think we've heard the board speak to that in terms of it's not a place that we want to be, but if we can get everybody on the same page at the same time, that's our best shot. I guess my last question, and then I'll let you go, is we also heard from a lot of families that have real concerns about masking for their kids. Those are very real in terms of not just mental health, but maybe some physical health things associated with masking. I guess as a physician, what do you see are conditions in which kids should not wear masks, or your view on mask harmful effects, both physical and maybe you can't speak to mental health, but from a physical perspective?
Well, I think first and foremost, the propensity of evidence for risk and harm last year was from the social isolation. And I think anything we can do to lessen that social isolation is really important. And I think a lot of it depends on how normative an action is. So for people who have traveled across Asia, particularly in China, you'll see kids, who are this tall wearing their mask getting on the school bus. It's what we come to accept as normal and allow to be normal. In terms of
if you want to discuss with us after the meeting, we're happy to discuss with you, but this is one point in the meeting that I get a chance to ask questions. Okay, great.
Okay. So in terms of ill effects, yeah, there are people who will feel claustrophobic. There will be people who have respiratory ailments that may not feel that they can breathe as well. People who are prone to panic attacks, that's going to make it much worse. And so I think it's going to be on an individual basis that one should talk to their pediatrician, their family physician, and so on, and discuss those. In terms of issues around causing pneumonias and so on, we don't see evidence for that. We have a whole slew of nurses, of physicians, of respiratory therapists who have been masked for weeks and months going through this and through horrendous situations, and now having to do it again. And so I think keeping that on an individual basis, and particularly we've heard from parents who have children with special needs with masking can be really significant. I think those need to be under consideration.
So Leslie, my question to you is in terms of families that have expressed real concerns about their children, special needs, physical, what is the process by which that they would connect with the school district to discuss those, and should we have this policy tonight?
Well, I think, again, this is something that they can talk to their physician, their nurse practitioner, their physician assistant, and so on. Get a letter if that is required, documenting the medical need. This is something we do all the time for all sorts of medical issues.
Thank you, Dr. Temte. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Leslie, do you want to address that?
Well, he's exactly right, that if people have concerns about their child related to any type of illness in connection to mask wearing, I would urge them to talk to their pediatrician or family physician and talk about the individual needs of that particular student. And as I stated previously, we would always honor medical excuses. And related to a student with an IEP, that is something that the IEP team would discuss. And we certainly have made modifications based on a student and the needs that are presented in an IEP team meeting.
Great, thank you. And I guess what I would say is, we all come at this from different places. People all over this room come to it, and we're here at this table to make these decisions and to listen to all sorts of information. And so we are elected to make those decisions. The board made this decision a year ago, and it is before us tonight. So I will open the floor for any motion.
I'll second that motion.
That doesn't need
Exactly
a
what
second.
you said.
That doesn't need a second. Tim, we need a motion.
Exactly what
Or-
you just said. We are voted in to make that decision.
And we
So-
have a policy that
so
that
this is-
said that the board made a decision. So I will entertain a motion to be put on the floor so we can discuss it.
I move to amend this motion. And the essence of my amendment, I don't have the exact words, I need Gina's help for that. The essence of my amendment are that we use multiple sources, including the sources we're already using, to make that decision as a board.
Is there a second to whatever that, Gina, do we need specific language, or what is the motion on the floor?
Remember it. So you can make the motion that we consider multiple sources in addition to the ones that we are using. That is a proper motion. And so if you want to designate those sources or just leave it open, that is up to the maker of the motion.
So Tim, it's up to you if you'd like to leave the motion as it stands, which then would require a second, and then we would discuss. Or if you want to clarify multiple sources.
Hey, Tim, can I suggest a friendly amendment?
You sure can,
Yeah, you
Kevin.
bet. Yes, I can.
I think we could use language that reflects, these sources, but not limited to. And I think what we'd want to conclude in the list, and we can come up with the actual motion here in a second, but hear me out. It would list the CDC, certainly our medical advisory board. I mean, my point I made earlier is why have a medical advisory board if we're not going to listen to them or take their input to make actual decisions. Our school board, our teachers, administration, as well as our valued community members to ultimately provide the school board with the most broad data points to make voting decisions. So I can craft that into an actual motion if you will allow me to make a friendly motion.
I would accept that.
There's a friendly amendment, or friendly, okay, so go ahead, Gina. Did you make note of what Kevin's friendly amendment to the motion was?
I did, but my suggestion would be for Tim to withdraw the motion and have Kevin or Tim restate it, listing the exact sources they would like us to consider, because I think it's a little bit, it's
Broad.
it's very detailed for a friendly amendment, in my opinion. That we would have Tim withdraw or restate a motion with more description provided by Kevin.
Okay.
Kevin, do you have that written down? I'll withdraw mine if you have that written down.
No, but I can dictate it here.
All right.
I have some notes. So the current policy 565, so I'm proposing an amendment to this policy, and it reads, I will tell you when the actual changes are made, but it currently reads, the Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with guidance, and this is where the changes come, with guidance from Public Health Madison and Dane County, the CDC, the Oregon Medical Advisory Board, our school board, our teachers, our administration, as well as our valued community members to ultimately provide the school board with the most broad data points to make a voting decision on such topic.
Okay.
So that's to be repeated.
Dina, do you have that?
I have everything until broad data points, and then I
Okay.
can hear the rest.
What did you say after broad data points, Kevin?
To make voting decisions.
So do you have, in order to help safeguard the health and safety of the school community, or are you striking that and saying in order to make decisions?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. In order to help safeguard the health and safety of its school community, which is currently in the policy. So I inserted that.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. I'm opening the floor for discussion. Who would like to address the motion and the second on the table? Heather, go ahead.
I'm open to adding additional sources. I think this is far too broad and gets us to not being a policy. I don't know how we would measure and manage valued community members. I am, again, totally open to community input. So that to me comes back to the school board gathering that. I just don't see how we can add that in, because I just don't understand. There's not a clear path to measuring that and to understanding it to make a decision and to analyze that data. The medical advisory group, what? Sorry, Kevin?
Kevin, just let Heather finish, and then I'll call on you to address her.
I took a long pause.
Okay.
The second part is the medical advisory group. Again, I think that's, again, that is a data point that we can use as a school board, so it's hard for me to put that in the policy. I'm comfortable adding the CDC in. I think who else am I missing?
Teachers and administrators.
Also good with them. But again, I would also say would that be the OEA voice? Because again, how are we measuring, managing, and analyzing teacher input? Is it the same? Is it our normal process, or is there something else? So I guess this motion is a little bit messy for me, to be honest, because it would not be clear to me how we would actually refer to said policy and then make a decision.
So is there any other further discussion, or Heather, would you like to offer a friendly amendment, or I guess we should all discuss and then.
Let's have somebody else weigh in.
I think my point here, more than anything, is that I'm uncomfortable relying on a single source that makes our decision for us and unmakes our decision for us. You know, as it stands right now, and Dr. Tempte was very generous in offering his opinion about this virus. The fact is, this virus or the next variant or the next variant or the next variant will likely never be gone. And if that's the case, these will never be gone. Especially if we rely on a single source to make that decision for us. I don't feel comfortable with that. I think someone said very nicely in the public comment, we have earned the autonomy for making this decision. There's lots of data out there, lots of data. And what we heard was, if we can just get to 75%, we'll have herd immunity. Oregon currently is 83.6% of all eligible people are vaccinated. 83.6%. And Dane County is 78.8%. We are killing it. But we will always have people who don't want to get vaccinated. We will always have exceptions in our student population who can't or shouldn't. And the very next step is Dane County, when we get an approval to vaccinate kids who are 2 years old, Dane County is going to recommend we do. I do not feel comfortable following that recommendation. That's what I'm trying to get at here. We have earned ourselves some autonomy. And
So-
we should be making that local decision, just like Evansville made their local decision to be in school full-time last year.
So, hold on, please. Kira, I'm asking you to let us have a discussion, okay? Thank you. So Katie is going to try and put the motion up on the screen so we all can see it. There it is. And so Heather has discussed this motion. Is there anyone else that would like to discuss the motion that's on the floor?
I can offer a couple of comments.
Go ahead, Anna.
I agree with the comment about it being too broad as far as how are we using data from our community members. I mean, our community members come to these meetings, they provide their thoughts, they provide their feedback. That's part of our decision-making process. They're always available to come to these meetings and voice their concerns and express their concerns. So I would strike that. I would also strike teachers and admin. Again, we have an OEA. They are part of that decision-making process. I know working with administration, but again, I would echo kind of Heather's comments related to how are we utilizing that piece of it, because clearly tonight we understand that there's a division between these groups. And so how do you weigh which one you're going to decide is the most important? So as much as I agree that we need multiple data points, and I'm pretty sure that Public Health Dane County Madison is not using a single data point to come up with their recommendations that they're presenting to the community. So again, I kind of fall back on let's rely on the experts whose job it is to review the studies, look at the data, and come forward with recommendations. They're also familiar with the local area, obviously. So to me, that makes sense to have an agency that is representing our local Dane County area, using all of the data that they are studying as scientists and health experts and people whose job that is. So
Can I just make a couple points? Number one, yeah?
I'm sorry, if I could just, because it was my motion, if I could just take some of the feedback and just make a comment quickly?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment, though. The fact that this is a policy means that the school board votes on it. So because of the function that it is a policy, the school board does make the decision. So from my point of view, it may be redundant to have school board in there because as the school board, we vote on policy, which we did a year ago.
No, I agree. I mean, this is a good discussion. I think it can
One second, hold on.
to include.
Gina has a point of order. Just to clarify, I'll get right back to you, Kevin, just one second.
I have a different motion than what Ms. Seitz has on the screen, so I would just want Mr. Mehring to clarify his motion because I want to make sure that that we have it correct in terms of what we're showing the board.
Okay, go ahead.
So I have, in addition, I had, and Mr. Mehring, you can correct me, after CDC, the Medical Advisory Board.
Yeah.
Okay. And then as I had the motion, and is that broad data points to make voting decisions in order to. But I would ask if Ms. Seitz could read it to Mr. Mehring since she's closer to verify the accuracy of the motion. Is that all right, Ms.?
Heard from Heather on and others about it being slightly clumsy. Wordsmithing live is never easy. I think the language that I wanted included in terms of including input but not limited to, so that we get guidance from but not limited to. So in essence, I'm striking my original motion and proposing an amendment that modifies the language based on the discussion we just had. And it points to, again, guidance from Public Health, CDC, our Medical Advisory Board, and others. So I'm simplifying the number of inputs because if we're good board members, we should be listening to our Valley Committee members, so I take that input. And the administration is part of the discussions during the board meeting, so it can be simplified. And the language that gives us flexibility to include, again, that would include other points of input is including but not limited to language.
Okay, so the motion on the floor then, Kevin, that you're making is that the Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness, 565, and protective measures 566 related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with guidance from but not limited to Public Health, Madison-Dane County CDC, Medical Working Group, and others to ultimately provide broad data points to make voting decisions in order to help safeguard the health and safety of its school community.
Correct.
Is there a second to that motion? Well, go ahead, Gina, you have a point of information here.
Because his original motion had a second, then his second would have to approve his amendment.
Okay.
I
Tim,
approve.
do you approve that? Okay.
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there further discussion?
I have a question.
Hannah, your floor is yours.
So based on this language, is this saying that anytime we're going to change the protective measures, that's not going to be done as an administrative function, that's going to be done as a board decision at a board meeting? Every time we want to transition or shift from these protective measures, we as a board are going to meet on it and take action on it? Is that what this current motion is setting us up for at this point?
That is correct.
I feel like that's maybe not, I'm not opposed to the board taking action on some of these items, but I prefer the fluidity of making quick decisions based on what information is available with the sources that we've identified. So
And I think we have the ability to do that.
Tim, let me let you have the floor, okay? Anna, are you finished? Okay, go ahead. Tim?
I think the board has the ability to do that at any time. We've done that in lots of other circumstances where we've provided administration flexibility on issues.
Dr. Bergstrom, would you like to comment on the motion on the floor?
I'm wondering, I'm going to ask Gina Jonan a question because she did the updating of the administrative guidelines that are underneath this preamble, the policy preamble. Gina, how often did you need to update the guidelines based on information that was coming from public health?
Sometimes daily, weekly, bi-weekly, as every time they updated, we updated as quickly as we could. And that was going to be one of my questions for Mr. Mehring, assuming that I heard him correctly in terms of his motion. I would want more clarification as to how we would do administrative guidelines that would help the board vote. So I appreciate Ms. Bijak asking the question because we want to implement the policy that the board approves in the proper manner. And to that point, if we are and I respect the board's decision making, the struggle for us will be if restrictions or recommendations are loosened, then we would have to come back and have a board meeting. Otherwise, we have to keep that in effect until it is changed by the board. And I was very grateful that we had that flexibility so that when, for example, when they said that masks outside were optional, we were able to do that in summer school right away without having to come back to the board to change that.
Tim, go ahead.
We are still adopting administrative guidelines regarding this issue. That's still part of the motion, right? So there's still the same administrative guidelines. We haven't changed anything about the administrative guidelines. We haven't limited them. We haven't offered the opportunity to change when things change. We haven't changed any of the administrative guidelines.
If the motion is saying that it's to allow for voting decisions in order to help safeguard, that means we are voting on these administrative guidelines. Is that not what that means? Oh, then what is the voting
Just 1 second.
decisions in
Gina,
order mean?
why don't you weigh in terms of policy direction here?
Well, that would be my question for Mr. Maring, because I wanted to make sure that I heard the motion correctly, and that as I read it, because we as an administrative team don't vote, the board votes. So I just would need some clarification to make sure we have the intent of what he's suggesting.
Krista?
Kevin, what is your intent with the motion? Yes.
So based on the discussion, I think we could add the language at the end of this current motion that says voting decisions when appropriate. Because I understand that, there's not always voting that's required. What I'm looking for in general from this, which Tim stated before, is we have a policy right now that looks to one party. And you could all imagine, it's unlikely in Dane County, I will admit that, but you could imagine in the future with the next pandemic, God forbid, that maybe there's someone in place there that doesn't have the same position as us. Maybe they're not taking it as seriously as we want to. Maybe we think their decision and guidance is not keeping our students safe enough.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at all the different potential scenarios. So that is the intention overall of this motion to begin with, that we're not so black and white and we're only listening to one body. So I think if we add it to the end of this to make voting decisions when necessary or when appropriate, I'm open to such a change and appreciate all your input on the implications of such addition.
Troy, you have the floor.
Gina, go first.
So if we are adding the language to the motion, then again, we would need Mr. LeBrun to approve that as a second or not.
Yeah, and I don't think we're there yet. So I don't mind adding broad data points and calling out CDC and medical working group. I'm kind of stuck on the statement to make voting decisions, because that's what we do. We could choose to rescind this policy at any time, and I'm just hesitant to make this more clunky and more ambiguous when the policy sets the administrative team in motion to make those decisions to follow the policy. And so I guess that's where I'm stuck, is on that voting decisions point, because we could call a meeting at any time and rescind it.
Is there any Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I see this really being handled no differently than the special meeting that was called in February when we took up the sports decision. We had a special meeting to bring that to the board for a decision that went against public health, and that's why we needed to hold a special meeting. That's why we needed to have a board action and vote, because it did not comply with our COVID-19 protective measures policy. And so if we want to make a decision that goes against the agencies or the groups that are listed in our policy, we can have that meeting and have that discussion at that time and still provide the flexibility and fluidity that we want for our school to be able to react quickly to the changes, because it's changing frequently and regularly. So I don't like the end of that.
Is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like the to make voting decisions when necessary, appropriate. I think when necessary, appropriate, who determines that? How is that determined? I'm not sure that's a policy that I could implement guidelines from. And I agree. I think we want to allow the district to pivot when conditions on the ground change, and pivot as quickly as they can.
And so how would you change the language?
I would strike the to make voting decisions when necessary, appropriate.
I would second that strike.
Well, that's not the motion on the floor. Kevin, you are the maker of the motion, so you can withdraw your motion with that change, or I can call the vote.
I'm open to that change.
So the motion would now read, the Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness and protective measures related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with guidance from, but not limited to, PMHDC, CDC, Medical Working Group, and others to ultimately provide or to help safeguard the health and safety of its school community. So we're striking to make voting decisions when necessary and appropriate. Is that the language we're striking? Just to make voting decisions. And so, Kevin, is that what you are saying?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Tim, do you second that?
Yes, I do.
Is there any further discussion? Heather?
Again, I'm coming back to, I hear that the goal is to not limit just to public health, Madison-Dane County. Fine, I get that, so great. We've added in CDC and Medical Working Group, and we've also added in but not limited to. I don't like the and others. I just think the more nebulous this is, the harder it is to abide by policy. Redundant. Thanks. Okay. And then I guess my question, I don't think anybody yet has the answer, but let's say the CDC is, right, they're national, and Public Health of Madison-Dane County is saying something different than the CDC. Or, another option is Public Health Madison-Dane County and the CDC are saying the same thing, but our Medical Working Group is saying something else, right? And that very well could be, because especially with the Medical Working Group, which I appreciate, which is why we started this, is that last year was they are taking in other considerations, not only just locally, but not just viral transmissions. But what happens when one of the three or two of the three disagree? How are we going to, where is our direction in being able to say, okay, they're conflicting, now what? I don't know the answer for that. That's just what strikes me as problematic when you have more than one guidance. I'm not saying that I think it should be one guidance. It's just food for thought.
Frankly, that's exactly the point.
That's exactly the point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that then it is inspiring additional discussion. All right. So far,
my question would be back to the question we had prior is, if we go with this and something changes, does this require us to get the Medical Working Group together in order to provide us guidance to make a decision? Meaning, we've brought together a great group of people, but we had a schedule where we were meeting every month, and we could have schedules. But I guess my question is, does this require us to have guidance from those groups in order for us to change administrative policy or guideline, to give administration direction to change that guideline? Gina, in your opinion, what does the motion indicate?
That we would consult with the Medical Working Group when appropriate.
So my question would be that CDC changes the guidance that says we do not need to mask 7-12 indoors. So that would require us to make sure we have PMHDC telling us some sort of guidance on that, CDC having some sort of guidance, and we would need to bring our Medical Working Group together to discuss that.
We would need to consult them if it was something within the purview of the charge from the board, and I believe that question would be within the purview of the charge. But I read it as consulting with the groups and then adopting guidelines, taking all of that into consideration.
Tim?
So would you feel more comfortable if we said that are in accordance with guidance from sources not limited to PH, MDC, CDC, and the Medical Working Group? So it doesn't have any requirement for each of those groups. It identifies sources that may be used to make the decision.
If that's the intent, then that's helpful to know, because we just want to do guidelines that are in accordance with your policy.
I would say that that is counter to Kevin's intent, that we actually have official bodies that we get guidance from. And I would not feel comfortable as a board that we don't take guidance from people and entities that are charged with making those decisions, public health decisions for a school district. So my question is in regard to the medical working group.
So maybe we say such as PHMDC, the CDC, and the medical working group. So it's not all inclusive, it's such as one of those three groups. If we leave in, but not limited to, sources such as.
My question is the intent that, Kevin, is your intent that you want more than one guidance source? So PMHDC and the CDC. And
my intention is that we don't have only one, because right now it's so black and white, we have one, and the decision is made by one body.
So would you be comfortable with guidance from PMHDC and CDC to ultimately provide broad data points?
Sorry, did you say but not limited? I missed the start of that.
I said that are in accordance with guidance from PMHDC and the CDC to ultimately provide, because what we're saying here is when you put in there not limited to, you're saying we need to find, and maybe that's your intent, that we find a third source besides PMHDC and CDC to back up their guidance. So we have three sources, but we're not specifying. It could be the medical working group. It could be UW Department of Pediatrics. Are you saying that you want three sources of guidance? And that...
No, I'm saying I want us to take all of these things in consideration. Like you said, the UW, Dr. Tempe, others, who may or may not be in the medical working group. I mean, at the end of the day, we have one body that's determined our policy. It's black and white. There's no decision to be made. You always have to take in multiple pieces of information from multiple experts and make a decision and actually vote on something. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Go ahead, Mary.
So Kevin, can I make a friendly suggestion for a change? So let's see, related to COVID-19, based on guidance from local, regional, and national experts. That kind of covers the need to get more than one source, but it doesn't limit us to specific groups. And I think the concern on the table is that the medical working group had a finite charter and would be challenging to reinstate on a short term.
I think,
oh, go ahead.
no, so there are two issues here. One is multiple sources of information and guidance. Two is the practicality of our administration of being able to develop administrative guidelines that allows them to implement these things, given some guidance, but quickly. Those are the two things that we are trying to address through this policy. And so I guess I would look to Gina and Dr. Bergstrom to say, does it help you to be specific with source points? How are you able to make administrative guideline decisions? If the board passes this policy, we need to give you the flexibility to implement those things. And so I'm looking to you for input on how that happens. So you can do for, you know, if suddenly we're able to not mask 7/12, we want you to have the flexibility to act in a good way quickly, as well as if things don't go south that we need to act quickly.
I would say that Dr. Bergstrom in her presentation referenced the sources that we regularly consult. Thus far, they have been consistent. So we have followed the policy in terms of Public Health Madison and Dane County, But to Dr. Lakuta's point, we consult the local, state, national experts, as well as the medical experts, and she has those sources cited in the slide. But thus far, we haven't had to make a decision because they've been consistent. If we had to make a decision, this policy would tell us to follow public health. So, and Dr. Bergstrom, you can correct me, but I believe you have the sources cited in your presentation.
That's correct. We've looked at all of them for guidance. I know that over the past year and a half, there have been times when there has been some inconsistency. And when there's been inconsistency, we've leaned into the most local source of information because we thought it was important to have a source such as public health that takes local data into mind. Because sometimes national organizations like the CDC are so broad because they have to cover such a wide range of circumstances. But a local organization like public health can take local circumstances into account. Consequently, when there was inconsistency, which there isn't anymore, but when there was, we relied on the most local sources.
So Gina, to that purpose, knowing what Kevin's intent and the intent of the discussion of the board, what is the most helpful language for this board to give you policy direction for an administrative guideline?
I don't know how to best answer that question in terms of what we have done thus far, Dr. Bergstrom has described. So I really feel that that's a board decision. If you would like to give us specific agencies that you want us to look at in terms of guidance. And just to give you an example, we received this weekend from Wisconsin Department of Health Services, guidelines for the prevention, investigation, and control of COVID-19 outbreaks in K-12 schools in Wisconsin. So we just received that this weekend, which is a 48-page, very dense document that we have been going through in anticipation of this meeting. So even though our policy says Public Health Madison and Dane County's guidance, this is from Department of Health Sciences, or Health Services, excuse me. So we are looking at this. We spend hours looking at CDC, looking at public health, looking at UW Pediatrics. We receive information and letters from medical experts in our community. So I appreciate and agree that we should be looking at a variety of sources, and we do, because I am not a physician, I'm an attorney. And so for me personally, I trust the local, national, regional, and state medical experts when it comes to keeping children safe about a virus. But I understand that as we learn more, that we need to be nimble and flexible. So I personally would say as a lawyer that I will look to the experts to give advice. But if the board wants us to consider other sources that we haven't been considering, then I would appreciate the board providing us with that direction.
Okay, Kevin, so it is 9:18. I know you've got to get on a plane soon. What I'm asking you is does this cover that the Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness and protective measures related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with guidance from PMHDC, CDC, and other local, regional, and national experts to ultimately provide broad data points to help safeguard the health and safety of its school community? How do you feel about that language?
I am accepting of that language.
Tim, do you take that as a second?
Yes.
Is there any further discussion? Sure. The Oregon School District shall adopt administrative guidelines regarding illness and protective measures related to COVID-19 that are in accordance with guidance from PHMDC, CDC, and other local, regional, and national experts to ultimately provide data points to help safeguard the health and safety of its school community. Any further discussion? Katie, can you call the roll?
Mr. Mary.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Ms. Bijak.
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Laputa. Yes. Mr. Pankratz.
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes, motion carries 7-0. So the Oregon School District will follow the recommendation of the administration because it's in accordance with the guidance from PMHDC, CDC, and other local, regional, and national health experts for both Policy 565 and 566. Moving on, Policy 180, meetings. Anna, these are coming from Policy Committee, so you will make the recommendation, which we will consider as a motion. So if you can walk through. And just as a reminder, the board meeting will have to end at 10 p.m. unless all of us vote to carry it further.
All right, thank you. So we have been very busy on policy, and the first item before you is Policy 180, board meetings. This was updated. Basically, we updated the allowances related to virtual or remote attendance at board meetings. Obviously, the expectation or the preference is to attend board meetings in person. We all know things happen. Kevin is currently getting on a plane shortly. So we recognize that there are circumstances that require or prevent a member from not being here in person, but we value all of our board members' perspectives, and we would like them to be able to participate even when they're not physically in person. So we've reviewed that policy, which did allow that for up to 2 board meetings. Our policy committee reviewed it and has recommended a few modifications to that policy. Specifically, we're looking to separate the committee meetings into its own policy 181. We'll talk about that next. Secondly, we added 2 more allowable situations for remote attendance, including childcare situations or vacations. We also increased the number of virtual meetings that are allowed in a calendar year from 2 to 4 meetings. We also added a condition that board members should provide a minimum of a week's notice for virtual participation, simply to allow for proper information to the administration and folks for preparing for that meeting. And we also modified the language of 180.02.07 to allow a virtual attending board member to vote on an action item even if they get temporarily disconnected from the call, and they can get reconnected before the vote, and they feel they've got enough information to take action on that item, that they would be allowed to be a voting member. That's a very broad overview of the changes. I would say that the policy committee did approve this with unanimously a 3-0 vote. And so with that, I would make a motion to approve policy 180 as it's prepared in your packet.
Is there a second? Oh, sorry, didn't hear you. Okay, any discussion? Troy, go ahead.
Jump in, Krista. So, yeah, I had a question prior to tonight's meeting, but it was answered at the beginning of this evening as we voted to allow Kevin to participate. I didn't understand how that would operate, so that was helpful. I think that going from 2 to 4, I did the math. I think it makes sense. It allows us to generally have quorum, because we would always need at least 4 members in person to have quorum. So not that it would work out this way, but if each of us missed 4 or were virtual for 4 meetings, all timed out exactly correct, we would still be able to maintain quorum. So I'm supportive of the policy change.
Any other further discussion? Hearing none, Katie, can you call the roll?
Ms. Bijak.
Yes.
Dr. Laputa.
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
Mr. Mehring.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz.
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes. Motion carries 7-0. Anna, I'm going to ask you to briefly go through 181, and then we are going to change up the agenda because Mr. Bill Foster from Public Perception or School Perceptions has been waiting here patiently for hours, and so we want to get him up to the the mic here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so policy 181 is a new policy that basically just took the committee meetings piece out from policy 180 and created its own. And the reason for that is that our committee meetings, we are giving flexibility on those being handled virtually or in person, and that would be a decision made by the committee chair in coordination with the members on that committee. So we wanted to just have it a standalone committee meeting policy. It has very similar language to the board meeting, with the exception of the fact that they can be virtual or in person, depending on that committee chair and that committee for the year. So the policy committee did recommend approval of 181 as it is prepared in your packet. And with that, I would make a motion to approve 181 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Point of information for Gina. Parliamentary procedure, can we move to a different item in the section of the agenda and then go back to action items?
You'll need to vote on that.
Okay. Can I have a motion that lets us move to the discussion item in the agenda, so go out of order and then go back to action items? Is there a second? Any further discussion? Katie, can you call the roll?
Yes.
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 Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. So we will now move to discussion item number 2, which is sharing end-of-year survey results, school perceptions. I will turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you, and I would like to thank Bill Foster from School Perceptions for waiting so patiently to give the report that he has to give us related to our end-of-the-year survey results. And we'll be focusing in tonight on the higher-level themes from our family survey and our staff survey. We'll be talking about our student survey at a later date. So Mr. Foster has a slide deck for us. It's going to be coming up right now on the screen. Mr. Foster, when you'd like Katie to change the slide, then you just say next and she will make it happen. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your patience.
Sorry for making you wait. And so what we'll do is we'll let him get through his whole presentation, and then we can ask questions at the end. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me tonight, and it was interesting. So I don't know, I can't say I enjoyed it, but it was interesting. So, but it's, by the way, you're not the only board in Wisconsin that's working through this challenging time. So we can go to slide 1. Again, I'm Bill Foster. I'm the president and founder of School Perceptions. We're a Wisconsin-based company. We started in 2002. We do surveys across the state of Wisconsin, Midwest, and actually we have done survey work in every state of the union. So that's many thousands of staff, student, parent surveys. We also do community surveys for the sake of strategic planning and referendum preparation. And I was with this board, not this board, but I worked with a board in the past on past projects with the Oregon School District. Next slide. So just a special note, I guess I don't have to say this tonight, but this last year was a challenging year, and it was very interesting from a survey standpoint. We really pride our company on having very good comparison data, but I've never seen so much variation from district to district. Data depended on your instructional model, if you're a full face-to-face, fully virtual, or hybrid, and literally month to month it changed. We also saw at the end of the year, probably the last couple months when the masking issue raised up again, that was yet another difficult time. So the data was flip-flopping all throughout the year from district to district. So I guess I just want to say that as a kind of a setup to your data. The next slide. So what I'm going to do is, my goal tonight is not to go through all the data. That would take too long. I just want to make sure the board, I think you have received or will be receiving all the reports, that you can interpret the data. So we had the parent survey went out in May. All parents could participate online. I think we also had a paper version available for those who didn't have internet access. We had 1,370 respondents. Next slide. So one section was called COVID check-in, and I'll just pause on this one a little bit. The way this was set up is all parents had this section once. We calculated a simple average based on if everyone would have said strongly agree would be a 5. If everybody would have said strongly disagree would be a 1. You can't be higher than a 5, lower than a 1. We then calculated a simple average. We also presented the data in terms of the percent that either agreed or strongly agreed, because that's probably easier for people that don't look at this data all the time to kind of interpret. So then we then sorted in the highest rated item to the lowest rated item. So you can see the lowest one was my children have been able to continue their friendships and connections to other kids during the pandemic. Clearly only half said yes to that. That was a difficult issue for parents. Next slide. We also wanted to test some feedback on the Panther Pledge. We had only 6% of our parents that said they're not very aware, so apparently we're doing a good job at least communicating the Panther Pledge. Next slide. Again, these were the core values, or we tested questions around where are the 5 core values, district administration doing what it takes to make our district successful, so on and so forth. And you can see generally you're pretty positive. You know, about 3/4 or more of your parents responding affirmatively to those statements. The next slide was overall communication. You could be great, good, fair, or poor. I'm a glasses half empty kind of guy. So I look at the 14 plus 8. So I say about 22% were either fair or poor. This is a question we ask on other surveys throughout the state. And I would say if you're better than 30%, you're actually doing pretty well. So I'd say you're better than average from a communication standpoint. Next slide, how would you like to receive communication? Number 1 was emails by far. Interesting little insight is probably 70% of your parents are on Facebook, but only 17% want to receive communication. And Leslie, I don't know if you're tweeting these days or not, but you don't need to make that a priority if you're not, because it's only 2%. Then what I did with this executive summary was I took out in the board packets, you have every school and all the data, but again, I don't want to spend the whole evening going through all individual data, so I picked on Brooklyn Elementary. So if I was a parent in the district, the way our survey worked is I was able to evaluate each school separately. So if I had a child at the elementary, middle school, and high school level, I was given these questions 3 times. So you can see it's broken into 2 slides here. We've got very high marks at Brooklyn Elementary, in fact, north of 90%, or north of 4-point average on the first items. And then including the second ones, we only dropped down to 77%. Overall, I'm satisfied with how much my child learned this year. By the way, that was a low item across all schools. So there is a concern from parents that this pandemic did cause some challenges in terms of how much kids were learning. I don't think that's a surprise. On the other hand, 3/4 said they're satisfied. Then we went a little bit into future planning. What is your current selected mode of learning? So you can see, and we were able to disaggregate if we'd like, which parents were in which groups. We had 86% were in a phased restart, and 13% at this particular school were online. Then we go to the amount of homework. You could be too little, too much, or just right. We tend to like to see too little and too much balance out. So here you could argue that parents in Brooklyn would like the rigor increased a bit. And does your child attend Brooklyn Academy currently participate in school-sponsored events? Again, you could cross-tab the data and look into those who are involved in extracurriculars versus those who are not. And then we looked into supplied hotspots, and it looks like we've got good internet access throughout the district, or actually throughout the district as well as Brooklyn Elementary. And then if full-time learning were available to your child next fall, would you enroll in this option? And this, we asked this question at every school. I'd say generally speaking, it was about 10 to 15% at each school, somewhere a little bit more, somewhere a little bit less. But that's still a significant number of students. If you've got, 4,400 kiddos or something, that's over 400 students that are looking for some sort of full-time remote learning option. We also did a comment analysis, so parents were able to respond at various points in the survey. We then did a comment theme analysis, so what we do is we read all the comments, we pick out the prevailing themes, we try to name the prevailing themes, and then in your board packets you received not only the theme, but also verbatims. By the way, we don't correct spelling, they are verbatims, so it's exactly what we have. So just quickly going through these, parents shared thoughts on what it means to be involved in their child's education, including understanding student expectations and providing support. There's a question that kind of fed that one. While most respondents were satisfied with the communication from the district, some suggested improvements. And again, if you go into that detail, you'll see the verbatims. Respondents acknowledged this past year with COVID was very difficult. Some families thought the district did an excellent job balancing safety and education, while others wish different decisions have been made. I guess that's not surprising. Some parents voiced concerns how decisions about school were made this year. So there was, again, verbatim supporting that. Parents shared thoughts and concerns about the challenges of virtual instruction. And respondents shared the best things. And by the way, there were a lot of comments. Really, when the dust settles, this is a very, very good district. I think as a board member, you need to hear that and keep that in mind. We did one overall satisfaction question. This is kind of based on a net performer question that we've modified. We asked this across the state. So we've got really good comparison data. And the question is, how likely would you be to recommend our school to friends or family members? Year average was 7.75. And at the end of the day, given everything that happened this past year across the state, you were above average. In fact, significantly above average. Again, as a board member, you should celebrate a little bit for that. So then we go to the staff data. Here we had 414 staff members, or 60% of your staff participate. We can break it out and look at everything from our classroom teachers, our ed specialists, support staff, our aides. It gave people an option to opt out, administration, and building substitutes. We can also look at the data from a experience standpoint. And by the way, in my world, there's kind of a pre-Act 10, post-Act 10 group, which is kind of interesting. The game changed at that time. Again, we can look at various schools. We had representation, including only a few from the early learning 4K. Same format here where we ask people to either strongly agree or strongly disagree. By the way, we don't have a neutral. In our world, we do ask people to lean left or right in terms of taking a position. Very high marks across. This is specifically to COVID-19. I think the next slide's a little more informative. If I had a COVID-19 related issue this school year, the district leadership was responsive. Only half of our sample actually had an issue, and of the half, 44%, 51% had an issue, and only 5% were not satisfied. Thank you. We also asked the Panther Pledge question. The good news here is only 2% of our staff weren't very aware of the Panther Pledge. And then these are standard questions we ask on our survey across the state, and these are very high marks. To what extent do you agree with each statement? And we've got safety. We have great access to technology. Some concern with workload, and by the way, that was a major, teachers were worked really hard. So that's a theme across the state that we're seeing. Next slide, again, high marks. Staff does a good job educating our students. With the lowest one is our staff handles student discipline in a consistent manner. And by the way, across the state, that is the biggest concern, is the way that student discipline is handled. You're actually much better than the state average. The state average is about 50% for staff. You're at 75%, but it's still one of your lowest ones. So depending on how you look at that. To what extent do you agree with each statement? So these are, Again, generally pretty positive. I feel supported by supervisor administrator when I make a decision, and all the way down to lower scores were in the area of recognized for doing a good job and district's pay practices are fair. It's 72%, still above the state average though. And then we also did a staff comment analysis, same format where we read all staff comments and identified prevailing themes. Staff members shared their appreciation for district's commitment to equity. Respondents feel there should be more dialogue between staff and administration and would like more input in decisions that affect their work. While most respondents are satisfied with district commitment to professional development and training, some offered suggestions for improvement. Respondents shared concerns about increased workload, especially this past year. And staff member shared some of the district's biggest strengths, including supportive administration and coworkers and commitment to prioritizing student needs. The last slide is, again, that's kind of net performer question. Here you are significantly above your comparison group. In comparison group, what we mean by that is we look at schools of similar size. So we have a small, medium, and large. It kind of works that way. So we looked at other larger districts like Oregon. You were in 8.32 with the comparison this past year at 6.75. So that is a quick overview of the data. So let me pause and answer questions.
Kevin, you've got I know you've got about 10 minutes before you have to get on a plane, so I'm going to let you go first if you have questions for Bill Foster.
No particular questions. I read the survey in a lot of detail this weekend, and the summary, at least verbally, is very helpful, so thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll open up the floor. Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for this overview. I echo Kevin. There was a lot of information in the board packet, and I appreciated reading all of that. I guess my take is it seems overall positive, so I'm hearing good things, which is great, but I think I might share your glass half empty thing in just a little bit. And so is there anything that rose to the top in terms of, a small red flag or something that maybe compared to other districts that you would say this might be something to look into or dig deeper? Knowing that overall, very positive, and I'm glad to hear that.
Nothing unique. To me, what was unique about this year was COVID and the pressure that put on the entire system. So unlike almost any other, I've been doing this for 20 years, that just, that's the big issue. So you almost can't get underneath that and identify sub-themes cleanly. So nothing really popped up where it was like, oh my gosh, there's a safety concern, there's a terrible communication. There was nothing else that really popped up. There is a group of parents with a bee in their bonnet that are very frustrated. We had 5%, which is a little bit higher in terms of people that, when I say 5%, that extremely unlikely to support the district. That's a little bit higher. Probably on average, you might see 3% or something like that. So you've got a few more people like that. But net, you actually have more positive, so that it ends up being above average. So a little bit bigger negative group, maybe. But other than that, no specific concern. There's not a curriculum concern. There's not a communication concern. Technology's good. Everything's pretty positive.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? Troy, go ahead.
Yeah, the quick one, kind of following up on Heather. The one that kind of stood out to me a little bit was on the parent survey. My family has been able to support my children's learning this school year, and we scored at 82% strongly agree, disagree, or strongly agree or agree. And I think there are some people in the community that might kind of question that score because it's a polarizing topic, right? We know that some families have really struggled supporting their learners last year. So could you kind of speak to that? I mean, are we comparable to others in that regard? Anything more to add to your response to Heather's question?
That's a question we just asked just this year. So we're not as, we don't have as, actually we've got a fair amount of comparison, but I would say you're about average. And now you're a little, It's true that probably in many districts throughout the state, they were full face-to-face or had more of a hybrid model as opposed to more of a virtual model. So, but even so, I think your parents, this was not a bad number at 82%. So nothing too surprising there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I started reading the comments. As I was reading, I figured, you know what, maybe I'll just print these off. And there are a lot of comments.
Mm-hmm.
Is this unusual?
Not this year. Not this year.
No?
And paradoxically, if they don't think you're going to read them and they don't think you're going to do anything, they don't make the comments.
Mm-hmm.
So if the fact that they are weighing in, they believe that this administration, this board, is going to sincerely listen to you. So there's kind of a weird dynamic there.
Mm-hmm.
That we work with other districts where we see that that's not the case. So it's not, and this was a special year in
Mm-hmm.
terms of generating a lot of comments.
Mm-hmm. Anything that stuck in your mind?
This is my advice for every board, not only the Oregon School District, but I think it's important to read the comments. It's especially important to know what the prevailing themes are.
Mm-hmm.
But to try to put too much emphasis on any one person's comment is, I think, can be misguided. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to read that one and then extrapolate that and say, this represents everybody because it was a comment. Well, no, it was one person's comment. So be careful with that. I'll tell you a funny story. I did a project in Northern Illinois, and there's some very, very bright administrators in Northern Illinois and around the Chicago area. And I was working with this older lady, and she was probably in her mid-60s. She was superintendent, and she looked at me and she said, Bill, she said, reading comments is like reading bathroom walls. And by the way, it's just a very prim and proper lady. As she's telling me this, I said, how so? She said, well, if one person says it, you just ignore it. But if a lot of people say it, it might be true. Mm-hmm. Which just stuck with me as kind of something funny to hear this lady who's reading bathroom walls. But comments is the same way. As a board member, if you print them out and read it, you kind of want to look for themes. You want to look for people, more than one person saying that. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it might be true, and we need to change a policy, a practice, a procedure. Sometimes it might be completely wrong, and we have to address it from a communication standpoint. Say, there's a perception out there of this. This is wrong, and here's why. Here are the facts or whatever it is. So it's helpful to read it, but you need to be careful when you read all those comments.
And so there's always a fear of either A, patting yourself on the back. Mm-hmm. You're better than average. You mentioned it a number of times. We're always, like everybody else, we're always looking to improve. Mm-hmm. Can you think of 2 specific areas where there might be room for improvement in these 2 areas?
It's a good question. I think the one that pops to mind that you were pretty low in across the board with all districts, or with all schools in your district, let me make sure I get the exact right one here, is really the concern about how much your students were learning this school year. I think, and I don't know if that's because your parents care more, maybe they do, or maybe they're legitimately concerned, but that's a concern, and that can be, it is what it is, it happened. But I think that was lower than others that I saw, more of a concern from parents. There's not another one that really pops up to really go through. There's some smattering from school to school, little things, but nothing too major.
Okay.
Well, the other one was that you do have a little bit bigger percentage of disgruntled parents, I guess, but I'm not sure what you do with that. I think you just have to work through that one decision at a time. Generally speaking, though, people are pretty complimentary of the board and administration here. Sometimes I have to go to board meetings and tell the board that people don't think they're doing a good job or they're not professional. That's not the case at this district. So it's actually a funner school board meeting to come to than some. But no, I think the perception is positive of the board and very positive of the administration.
Thank you.
Great questions, Tim. Any other questions? Leslie, you have any?
We've just been going over this information quite a bit in the last month or so. So I think everything that's been discussed here already is something that Bill and Erika Mundinger and I have already been discussing as we go through and analyze the themes that Bill's company has collected for us. So I don't have anything to add other than it was great to work with school perceptions. I loved having data that can be normed. That was something that was very helpful.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your patience with us tonight.
Thank you.
And staying so late.
All right.
Thank you so much. Okay, board members, we do have some critical items on our agenda, action items that we need to get through. We do have a policy that states the board meeting has to end at 10 o'clock unless a unanimous vote of the board. So we do have 3 items that we really need to get through. So I would entertain a motion for us to go past 10 o'clock.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Pankratz? Dr. Lakuta? Ms. Bijak? Ms. Garrison? Mr. Maring? Is he gone? Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Motion carries by unanimous consent. Why don't we take, can we take a pause for 2 minutes? People can run to the restroom and we'll be right back. Can we do that or do we have to recess? Okay.
That one's downstairs is actually posted.
Is it? Okay.
You can only go 3 at a time.
Okay, could everybody have their seats? We'll get ready to get started again. So what we are going to do, we are waiting for Troy. Oh, he's here. The 164 anti-hate speech co-curricular code and the employee handbook. We will save the SRO for our meeting on the 23rd because that is an important topic that requires more discussion than just 5 minutes. So we will postpone that for the 23rd. So next up on the agenda is policy 164 anti-hate speech, and that came from policy as a recommendation. So I'll turn that over to Anna, and she can bring Gina Jonan into the conversation if she'd like.
Great. Yes, so policy 164, anti-hate speech. This policy was reviewed at our last meeting to update it to be in alignment with the recent Supreme Court ruling of the Mahoney Area School District versus Levi. The recommended modifications really included updating the language of 164.01.3 to include school-provided transportation. And the other update is in 164.01.4, and that was to specifically state bullying or harassment targeting particular individuals or threats aimed at school staff or other students. And then the legal resources were updated to include a reflection of that court case for the language that supports this policy. Our policy committee did recommend approval unanimously with a 3-0 vote. And with that, I would make a motion to approve policy 164 as was presented in your packet.
Because it goes as a recommendation from a committee, it doesn't require a second, which I've just learned. So, learning lots of things this evening. So is there any discussion on the changes and recommendations from 164?
I just have one.
Go ahead, Tim.
Gina, was there anything about this case that took us by surprise? What that caused us to make these changes?
So I would say, was the ruling a surprise to me? No, it was not. But we did adopt the language from the case just to ensure that the public can see that our policy does comply with that U.S. Supreme Court case, since that's the most recent guidance that we have.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Moving on to co-curricular code of conduct. Anna.
All right, the co-curricular code of conduct is being updated or recommended for updates, also to be in alignment with the recent Supreme Court ruling of Mahoney Area School District versus Levi. In particular, the changes are specific to section 2.05, other conduct. And what we did is we revised the language to have a positive approach as to their conduct representing our district in a positive way, as well as providing clear expectations regarding the policies that are to be followed and complied with as a student athlete or as a co-curricular participant. And it also provides clear language that this can include off-campus conduct and social media where allowed by law, which again is a reflection of that court case ruling. These changes are in alignment with that recent Supreme Court ruling and were recommended unanimously by the policy committee. And with that, I would make a motion to approve the updates to the co-curricular handbook as presented.
So the board also had a chance to read all this material prior to the meeting. So are there any further questions for discussion? Go ahead, Troy.
I have one question. Did we not have a COVID-19 addendum last school year? And was that a separate document? And how will that be handled moving forward?
We did. And are you comparing that to the addendum that we would have for this? Is that what you're thinking? Yes. So we would handle it in a very similar way. However, we have some ideas on how to ensure that the information we're imparting to the students is has some real meaning to it. For instance, as we said on here, a video update for teams to watch together and discuss. So it's not just a form that people sign electronically, but an experience to help them better understand how it connects to them and their life as an athlete.
And will that come to the board for approval then? Does the addendum need to be approved by us?
No, I think the addendum would just be reflective of the update to the policy, or to the policy 164.
Okay.
It would adhere to the 565, 566, and 164, so it would apply to those policies.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Katie, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Dr. Lakuta? Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Moving on to the 2021-2022 Employee Handbook. Anna, you going to take that, or Gina?
I am going to ask our lovely Gina to take that one.
So the policy committee met prior to the meeting tonight, and there were 3 changes that they approved that were based on the prior approval from the previous meeting. So the handbook that you see tonight has been approved by the policy committee, and the significant change was in section N, and I appreciate Mr. Johnson's help and collaboration with the OEA. In terms of that language, we reached a compromise with our staff that we will educate our staff on that they would inform Dr. Bergstrom for if they were offering services outside of contract hours, and that we made it clear that they are not able to charge for services that the district should be providing as part of a free and appropriate public education. So with that, we are seeking a motion to approve the employee handbook and hopeful to have that because new teacher orientation starts next Monday.
Anna, is that a recommendation and a motion from the policy committee?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Does anyone have any additional questions based on the changes that we've seen in the employee handbook?
Kristen, no questions, but I guess I just want to kind of point out a distinction in that tutoring language, in that it really defines for pay, that you can't use district resources for pay, because I know that a lot of our staff are tutoring or providing assistance to students throughout the summer, for example, without being compensated. And I think that's an important distinction that we make, so that's all.
My one question is regards to the language about same thing. So the previous language said that the staff person needed to check with the superintendent prior. This language now just says that they will inform the superintendent. When does that happen, or is it really just moving the burden to the staff member that says, okay, it's their responsibility to understand what the policy or what the employee handbook language is?
Yes, exactly. And we did talk about that with the OEA, that this language, and the OEA proposed that the educator has to be proactive and monitor that. And so, of course, part of what we would like to do, and they'll educate their members, and we will do that as well, because we always want to address something through prevention and education, rather as opposed to being reactive to a situation. So we will be good partners in educating folks about that language, and always encourage, and almost all of our teachers do, ask either the OEA or myself or Dr. Bergstrom those questions. So we're comfortable with the language.
Dr. Bergstrom, do you have anything to add?
I do not. I'm very comfortable with the changes as proposed.
Okay, any further discussion? Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun? Yes. Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Okay, like I said, we will be postponing the SRO agreement to the 23rd, so we'll go through the rest of the discussion items pretty quickly. Anna, you were busy at policy. Any other things you want to report?
No. Well, our next meeting is scheduled for September 20th at 5 p.m., right? Is that our start time? 5 p.m.? 5:30 p.m. So that would be our next meeting, and I have nothing more to report.
Thank you for all your work in leading policy. You've been very busy. Vision steering, Troy.
Yep, I'll be brief. We've met last week. We had 2 agenda items, the decision-making framework. We were doing pre-work for policy 175, the student-centered decision-making, and then we reviewed the input from our Portrait of a Graduate focus groups.
Great, so you will be busy too. Worth Woods, Tim.
Not a lot has taken place this past month with regards to Worth Woods. It's growing season, which means it's mosquito season in Worth Woods. And so we're going to let fall settle in a little bit, get a clearer understanding of what our next steps is. We will be meeting sometime in September after school starts.
Great, thank you. Moving on to information items. Leslie, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, I will work through just a couple of high-level items. You've all seen our visioning and strategic planning framework, and I just wanted to point out the fact that we are in the research, input, and design process. And if you were present at the vision meeting last week, you know that we are in the knee-deep in the input and design process related to some of our major things, such as Portrait of a Graduate and the decision-making framework. And you can see here that we are collecting input from a variety of sources because all of our stakeholders are important to us and we want all of their thinking to be reflected in the final result, which will be a graphic that depicts our Portrait of a Graduate vision as well as a policy that articulates it in writing. And here are some examples of our in-person focus groups, but we've also had a successful virtual night. And we will be continuing to collect input, including from our students this fall and our community based on Draft 1. So for our teaching and learning update, I had mentioned previously that our strategies to support physical wellness were only one strand of the bigger picture related to our Back Together plan for the fall of 2021. So it's mental and physical wellness, along with high quality teaching and learning that are our priorities, and our actions related to that will be driven by our values. So, as far as what it's important for you to know right now is that we have had a lot of families make their online learning selection, and we'll give you an update on that, as well as the 2 priorities for the Back Together plan. So even though you saw in the school perceptions survey that a significant number of people said in May that they might be interested in online learning, when we actually asked the question and asked them to make a selection this past month, the numbers were significantly different. And that might be because people are very eager to be back in school in person. And it also might be because people would rather have their child in person than the type of online model that we will be utilizing in the fall, which is we are working with outside vendors who will be supplying courses for our students. But thankfully, there will be an OSD teacher as a liaison who will be meeting with our students on at least a weekly basis. So you see here, we only have 18 students, K-8, who are full online, 16 at the high school, and thus far we have 41 students who are interested in a blended schedule. However, that number is significantly lower than what it usually ends up being in a regular school year. So I'm anticipating there may be some students who express interest to their counselors as school approaches. So for mental, social, and emotional wellness, which are a really important priority for the fall, given everything that everyone has been through, some key highlights are continuing to expand our student services team. You know that we added our 2 social workers that you approved as part of the staffing plan this spring. Of course, there's a prioritization on relationship building, and really creating a culture of belonging and inclusion at the classroom level, the school level, and the district level, and being intentional about those things. We've also been analyzing the data from the Panorama survey, which was the social emotional survey that was given last spring. Our SEL coaches have been meeting with every building leadership team to discuss their particular building's results and to make plans that meet the individual needs of students, but also the broader themes within the building. And then all buildings are continuing to update their calming space, which is a universal, is open to all students universally who could benefit from such. For high quality teaching and learning, some of our key practices will be ensuring that the learning is accessible to all students, and we'll be leaning into the Universal Design for Learning framework to allow us to maintain that high quality rigor and accessibility. We'll be using pre-unit assessments to gauge student proficiency on the prerequisite skills, but at the same time, moving forward with grade level content, but embedding support for those prerequisite skills so that students aren't stuck doing work from last year, but moving forward in their grade level content and just supporting them appropriately along the way. There's always going to be a focus on foundational reading skills at each grade level because we know how significant that is to students and their success. And then consistently using online platforms such as Google Classroom and Seesaw so that when students aren't in school, they're able to access. And we're also able to provide some level of consistency beyond or for students who are in multiple classes. So August 16th is when online registration opens and when our K-8 students get to see their teacher assignments, print off their schedules, and that's when you add in your new or updated contact information, photo permissions, etc. And then we're very excited that August 20th through 31st is when teachers will be scheduling Ready, Set, Go conferences for our students in K through 8. And they can either be an in-person conference or a virtual conference, but this is something that we really prize after last year's experience. The feedback was so good from families and so positive from our staff that we knew this was something that we wanted to carry over and continue. We'll also be setting our athletic protocols for competition, and we'll be able to bring that to you at the next board meeting so that you can take a look at that. September 1, classes begin, and then school photos in school. So it'll be nice for the kids to have pictures again in the traditional manner. And then it'll just be the superintendent's report, which is one slide, so I can either finish it up and then do questions. All right. It's really just a nod to summer semester. It was the July 6th through 30th, and you can see there were a variety of learning experiences, both inside and outside, that really focused on cultivating a joy for learning. Our summer school was not a remedial program. It was about making sure that students were able to find something fun in their learning and really enjoy what was offered to them by our really amazing and dedicated staff. And speaking of staff, another thing is next week is the new educator orientation. So that's one of my favorite weeks of the year when we get to meet all of the wonderful new educators that are joining the Oregon School District and really help them better understand everything that we are about in the OSD.
So I do think that, before we ask questions of Leslie, if anyone has anything, I think everybody got the invite about the new teacher education luncheon. I will be going with Leslie to do a talk about the board, and I will not be talking about Pink Floyd, as Steve has done for the last 9 years. So I will have to think of something really good, but it's not going to be Pink Floyd. So we'll see. Does anyone have any questions of Leslie? Okay. Moving on to closing. Future agenda items, we will have in our August 23rd meeting, we will have SRO and discuss that. Thanks to Tim and Mary for being part of that discussion and all the work that Gina has done. So we'll be discussing that in detail. Policy, I believe, will probably have a couple items potentially, and then we will continue working through visioning. But if you have anything else that you would like added to the agenda, please do let Leslie and myself know, and we will put that on there. Before we go to checkout, I want to thank everybody. This was an intense meeting. I want to thank everybody in the room for being here and voicing your opinion and sharing your thoughts. This is what caring about our kids' education looks like. And we're not always going to agree. We're going to listen to each other, but that doesn't mean we're going to agree with each other all the time. But I really appreciate the board members taking time, studying, learning, reading, talking to our constituents. It's really important. So thank you to the administrators that are here tonight. Thank you to Nate. Thank you to all of our community members that are here. This is tough. This is tough work, but we'll get through it. So closing. Anna, anything? Nothing. Tim? Nothing. Troy? Heather? Mary?
Yeah, I just want to say that I completely recognize that all of the parents in the district just want what's best for their kids. And I would hope that the vast majority of them recognize that the board, the administrative team, and the teachers also want what's best for all of the kids in the school district. So thank you for your words, Krista. I think that it's really important for us to come together and work through this together rather than being divided.
Thanks, Mary. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye.